Good evening, members. Welcome to tonight's, I'll say edition, we don't do a programme, but Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee meeting 29th of November 2016. Before we get to the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that we are not expecting a fire alarm tonight. If it does, please remain seated and Mrs Matthews kindly will assess the situation and give further instructions. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone is intending recording the proceedings, can you please let us know? I ask this in question not to stop you, but for merely giving this for information and for other members of the public to know this. I would like to take this moment to welcome members of the public this evening. It's nice to see you here, and we'll go through that as we get to it. First item is my chairman's announcements, and I always try to do good news. And before I just continue, there was a rumour that we were going to have to bring sleeping bags this evening because it was going to be a long edition, but I'm pleased to say that hopefully we have two major editions and we won't need sleeping bags. I've been recently sent to Coventry on a leadership course, Essentials in Culture. It was a seminar with other councils. 12 councils were there at Coventry, and we did speak an awful lot, although we didn't go there to be silent. And we studied best practice for across the board between the councils, the culture offer in changing times. And it has to be said that we are in difficult times still, and obviously all the councils are looking for ways to promote culture and help ways of regenerating it. I had the privilege of attending last week the Maidstone Museum Friends fundraising evening at the museum. Lovely evening it was too, and we had Julian Richards from Meet the Ancestors. You probably remember him with his Land Rover, and he came along and gave a very good talk on the ancient gallery, proposed progress there and the funding, and gave us an insight into his career, which was very interesting. And obviously we talked about our famous mummy, of course. No apologies for mentioning her because she's going to be a great draw in the museum as we go forward. As I said before, she's had a scan and unfortunately the diagnosis isn't too good, but a lot of new things have come out of that, and hopefully you've seen the publicity on that. She's certainly older than she said she was. And only yesterday we had the update on the Destination Management Plan, which we'll be coming on to a little later. A year update. It's a 3-year plan, and we had the update yesterday, and that again was a very good session, and we've certainly made some progress, which you will hear about. Right, apologies, item 1. Have we had any apologies?
We've had apologies from Councillor Mrs Stockwell.
Thank you. Substitute members?
Councillor Perry is substituting for Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. I can't resist saying welcome again, and I don't think you can resist not coming.
It's always a pleasure.
It's always good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, we have no urgent items tonight, members. Do we have any visiting members? Councillor Daly. Thank you very much. Do we have any disclosures by members or officers? Disclosures of lobbying. I think we may have all been lobbied on item 12. Councillor Ells.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, on agenda item 12.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry. Councillor Revell, did you want to declare an interest on items this evening? You don't wish to? Okay. Just items of interest, clash of interest? Especially on item 12. Okay. Okay, thank you. Right, we move on to items, minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of November 2016. I will take these through in page order. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 5. Okay, members, are we agreed that's the full record of the meeting held on that date? Thank you very much. We'll sign that as a true record. Item 8, we have no petitions this evening. We do have questions from members of the public and statements from 2 organisations, but as they all relate to agenda item 12, I intend to take them then. Item 10, items to be taken in private. There are no yellow pages, members, so we have no need to retire on those this evening. We move straight on. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, might I suggest, as we have members, I think members of the public come almost exclusively for item 12, that we actually take item 12 before item 11. Am I correct in that assumption, that the majority of people here? I think it would help if we reverse that order for the members here. We can do that with the committee's agreement.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, but we've already considered that and we feel that it would be beneficial that we do the first item 11 as it is the destination management plan, and it gives our members of the public a flavour of what is happening in the borough. So we'll continue in the order we've got. Thank you.
Having asked the question, Mr. Chairman, it has to go to the committee, I have to say. They can well agree with you. I'm not saying they can't, but I have asked the question and the committee does have to actually say.
We do have a member of the public that hasn't turned up yet, so I would like to wait that. But committee members, do you wish to change the order of that, or are we happy to? Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My thoughts are, I'm going against you, I'm sorry, Fran. If item 11 has a reflection on 12, which could make people think, then surely it would be more sensible to take that one before item 12. It's just my thought. If one has a bearing on item 12, then surely it would be better to do it in that order. Sorry, Fran.
You're perfect. It's fine. All I'm saying is that as I've raised it, it does have to go to the committee.
Sorry, members, unless there is real argument against it, I'm still going to take it 11 and 12 in order. Item 11. Can I ask the report from the Head of Commercial Tourism, Destination Management Plan, progress update on page 6, and Laura Dixon will be presenting.
Good evening. This is an update report on the progress of the Tourism Destination Management Plan. Yesterday, around 40 tourism businesses, stakeholders, attended an event on the DMP 1 year on, and this included a presentation on the new cycle path by KCC and an update from Visit Kent. One of the things that came out of the meeting yesterday and was actually embargoed until yesterday from Visit Kent was the information on the new economic impact of tourism, figures for Kent, and some figures for Maidstone. For the first time, visits to Kent have reached over 60 million visitors, and figures for Maidstone were there were 300, this is based on 2015 data, 373,000 staying trips in the borough, which equated to 1.241 million staying nights. The spend by staying visitors equals £67 million, with an average spend of £179 per visitor. There were 3.8 million day trips, with 122 million spent by day trippers, with an average spend of £32 per day visitor. The total spend by visitors in the borough is estimated at 189 million. Going back to the Destination Management Plan and the report, the key successes so far, some of these were reported in the last update, but it's worth just recapping on those. Firstly, there was the Shared Story Toolkit, which is available online. The creation of the online image library, available for tourism businesses to download images and for the media as well. The creation of an online events planning calendar, and the installation of design and installation of the new historic interpretation panels around the town. Since then, since the last report, we've added to that, and one of the main things we've done is have commissioned new iconic tourism photography, and on the screen you will see a selection. I apologise to the people behind the screen, but only one screen's working. A selection just to show you. There will still be more added to the selection over the coming season, and also to reflect events. And these will be added to the image library so that other people can actually use and share them as well. We will have around about 150 images selected, new images that will go on, and they're specifically designed for tourism marketing purposes. The other thing which I will show at the end of this item is one of our, or two of our new promotional videos that have been shot. These are based on the Tourism Destination Management Plan, the Shared Story, and specifically to attract the key growth markets identified in the DMP. So far, there are 8 videos yet to be fully edited, and there are different themes around them. There is one for history and heritage, food and drink, museums and culture, parks and countryside, explore, shopping, accommodation, the two of us, and some events ones still to take place. Another part of what we've been doing in line with the key target markets is the creation of the Conference Maidstone website. This is one of our key growth markets around getting together. This website promotes Maidstone venues for business, for weddings, and it is self-funding through support of the local venues. We've also built a new museum website allowing access to visitors to make bookings for events and 24/7, and it is fully responsive, meaning that the destination information is available on mobiles for those people actually in the borough. We've also created widgets. These are search boxes based on elements of the data on Visit Maidstone, the What's On section, the accommodation search section, and the attraction section. These are basically a search box that can be added to any website. So, for example, a bed and breakfast provider can add the attractions search box to their website, and then their visitors to their website can search on local things to do. And the benefit for the accommodation provider is that they do not need to keep the information up to date. They are basically drawing the information from the Visit Maidstone website, and we're keeping that up to date on a daily basis. The accommodation one has already been used by festival organisers on their ticketing website, so it helps their visitors or their attendees search for accommodation. The other thing that we've done recently, and we're still waiting for a response, is we have applied to Highways England for new strategic signage on the motorway to replace the park and ride signage at Junction 7 that pointed to the facility there. And we're looking for brown signage that illustrates that Kent is the historic county town of Kent. And we're still pushing for that one. Further on in the report and in Appendix 1, you'll see the action plan updates from the 4 groups that were initially established to deliver some of the actions. Just to mention some of the actions that have happened so far, from the River Group, they have formed what was going to be a friends group, but is actually the Maidstone River Park Partnership, which is a partnership of public, private sector businesses and volunteers and residents who are keen to work to make the river area a better place. There will be new signage on the new Bridge Gyratory scheme and the cycle path, and there is now a Maidstone River Park Partnership website. There's been an audit of facilities for visitors completed, and there will be footpath investment taking place as part of the new cycle path scheme, which has already started to be built. One of the biggest things that's happened and recently is identification of the ownership of land along the river and ownership of the issues so that some of the work can be done. And we're very successful in getting McDonald's volunteered for 2 days, sending 30 volunteers down to clear some of the overgrown areas. Around the events group, main activity to start with was an audit of the venue facilities and the suppliers. That information is now being looked at and how it can actually be provided to event organisers and promoters. And the proposal is to put a whole event section on the Conference Maidstone website, as conference and events are actually work hand in hand. And this will have dedicated information and pages for event organisers. The event forward planning calendar still requires regular updating and reminding, and that will feature as part of the event notification system. The group is now really established as an events expert group, and will be looking forward to thematic planning and joint marketing opportunities in the future. And a new campaign next year looking at Maidstone Season of Music is planned. The What's On widgets obviously help the event organisers if we can get the What's On widgets out to as many businesses and accommodation providers as possible to include in their websites. And we have an event suppliers list that we're compiling with all approved suppliers that we can give to organisers. In the town, the major thing has been the farmers' market, which is now on the last Friday of every month. And they're looking at the potential of moving the Saturday general market to the square. The work will be starting on the public realm improvements at the north end of Week Street. Network Rail are investing in Maidstone East with a new station in Forecourt, and this will link with the public realm work and public art and signage. An audit of shop fronts at the north end of Week Street took place, which now requires the next steps in funding. And this could be a way of actually encouraging owners to improve their buildings. Heritage Lottery Townscape Initiative bid has been submitted for Gabriel's Hill, which, if successful, will include themed trails. And the Public Realm Design Guide has been adopted with 4 zones: shopping, river and green spaces, culture, leisure culture, historic and heritage. And the public art policy has also been adopted for the borough. And finally, the Countryside Group. Again, a product and marketing audit of tourism in the rural area took place, and this included a survey to all the parishes, to the tourism businesses and other organisations such as Produced in Kent and Explore Kent. An audit of brown signage was undertaken, and any redundant brown signage has been removed. The marketing audit has also proved some good results in partnership working, and walking routes and maps have been identified and added to the website. Videos of the area, which I'll show, will be used to develop future campaigns. And there are now 2 working groups producing cycle routes and a driving tour, which are in the initial stages. And rural information points, potential sites have been identified, and an application for leader funding is in hand. I'll play the video. Forgot about the video. One moment.
Given the problems that we're having with technology, I think we'll leave it at just showing that one video. But if any members would like to see the whole set, and a lot of us did yesterday at the DMP event, they are really impressive, and they're all set to music, which unfortunately you didn't get the benefit of this evening. The photographs will go on to the image library on the Visit Maidstone website, as Laura has already indicated. But we'd be happy to accommodate a special viewing for members who would like to come and see the full set of videos.
Thank you very much for that report, Laura. That was very informative and brings us right up to date. I just remind members that this is 1 year into a 3-year programme, and if you went to the presentation yesterday, you will understand that a lot has been achieved in the last 12 months, more than even I knew, and I've also learned an awful lot about the plan going forward, so thank you very much. Members, who would like to throw in the first Councillor English, did you want to speak on item 11? Would you like to come forward? Thank you.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. This may be thought to be slightly pedantic and nitpicky. However, I have been making a point about the formulation of recommendations on papers at every opportunity. And as far as I can see, the recommendation on the paper is not a recommendation. It says this is an update report on the progress on the Destination Management Plan, 3-year plan for noting. Now, it needs to be reformulated into, first of all, assuming you are noting the report, to say that. So that's one technical point. The second question is, there's been a lot of good work, as the chairman said, and the action plan has been updated. May I ask at what point in the various committee cycles of this council the amendments to the action plan and changes to it are going to be agreed or not? Because there is a governance issue here, and whilst I do agree that the Destination Management Plan is in some ways sitting slightly outside the council's normal structure, there does need to be a reporting mechanism in which the changes of these plans are at some point reported on and agreed overall for the council's committee structure. That doesn't need to be done tonight, but it does need to be done at some point, because there are very significant additions and changes, good additions and changes to these reports. Finally, one minor observation on the Public Realm Design Guide. It is quite correct that the majority of the Public Realm Design Guide has been approved by this committee, but I would point out for the sake of completeness, a very, very important part of that guide is still subject to approval, and that is the planning policy section of the guide, which will make a very significant contribution, or should make a very significant contribution to this section, which will be going to Strategic Planning Committee in due course. That is not to take anything away from anything that's there. It's just to add to it and say that that brings an extra dimension to the document, because it starts connecting what we do in development control with what this committee does, and provides an organic linkage between the two, or will, hopefully, if the committee approve it. So just to add that for the sake of completeness.
Thank you very much, Councillor English. I will just make a comment. We'll take your comments on board. Thank you very much. Just to remind you that obviously this committee does deliberate and look through the items first, and obviously where appropriate we will send it to another place if we need to. Thank you.
Do need to slightly amend the recommendation on the papers, because it isn't actually a recommendation at the moment.
Councillor Wilson.
Well, I've been on a bit of a crusade regarding this across various committees, and it is true that here we have at the top of the page, is this the final decision on the recommendations? And it says yes, and this is not a decision. We are not making a decision. To bring it into the same format as we see in other committees, the wording should be to note the update report on the progress on the Destination Management Plan 3-year action plan. That would be then the same sort of wording that I'm sure other councillors will realise that we've seen on other reports. And so I would make the recommendation that we do note the report, but with the wording amended in the way I've said, so that it's written in the same way as it comes to other committees.
I'm happy to agree.
Seconded by Councillor Revel. Take that forward, the appropriate wording. Thank you. Sorry.
There's one other thing that I think that we should also say, and that would be a number 2 actually, but it's still not a decision, but we could just say that we're pleased with progress so far and we'd like that noted.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Perry.
I totally agree with Councillor Wilson. I think I attended the presentation on Monday, as some of us around here did. I was very impressed. I thought it was a lot of progress is being made, actually, and I'd like to thank the officers concerned because there's a lot of work, and also the other parties involved. My only slight concern is on the countryside group, where I think we do need a little bit more support, dare I say, particularly from the parishes who I think have been, dare I say this, but a little bit lax, I think, in coming forward. Some have, I know, but I think we need to try and chase them up a bit to make progress in the countryside group, because I think that's very important as well. And I'm happy to do that through Calc as well, but you may need a bit more pressure on the parishes. Thank you.
Councillor Perry, I agree with you. Anything you can do in your neck of the woods will be much appreciated. Thank you. Councillor Ford.
On the rural part of it, it says there's 3 local rural information points. Where are they?
The areas that we're looking at specifically, and we actually had, I think we had more than that to start with. We're looking at a sort of Staplehurst area, Yalding area. There was actually 4, Lenham and Headcorn, Staplehurst, Lenham, Yalding, I think, were the ones. What we're struggling with a little bit at the moment is finding the right location and the right partner, because the model that's been used by Tourism South East and other destinations is to create an information point in a local cafe or business that can support tourism, that has that's open 6-7 days a week, that has parking nearby. So we're looking for the right partners, and we've identified a few, and we're hoping to take that further now.
Any other questions, members? Councillor Perry.
Yes, I was going to come back on this. It's an important point. The public, we in Staplehurst, and I'll speak for my own ward, the library is used quite a lot as a central point. Our parish office is another one, but that's only open 5 days a week. So, but the library is open and it's pretty active on Saturdays. So that may be an option. I don't know whether you've considered that or not, but anyway.
One of the garden centres perhaps that may have on the main road, and it's also about finding a location that is probably on one of the trunk roads that people are passing through and may be willing to stop at as well. And the idea will be then to give them more information about Maidstone and the area, but also about the attractions close to that particular information point as well.
Councillor Wilson.
I listened to what Councillor English had to say, and it's very difficult, I think, to work out whether there's value in what he's saying or there isn't, partly because of the way the papers are laid out. I am not criticising the way we've got them, other than to say I think it might be helpful if we could sign off on things, if I put it that way. So where something has been undertaken and we've completed it, it would be quite nice to have what I call a sign-off paper, and then it's sort of there as a separate, we have done this, this is finished. And then because we want to know what we're attempting to achieve for the next 12 months. So the bits that aren't signed off, if you follow what I mean, would be there as the next bit that we could either ask for half yearly or wait for the end of the year and say, okay, so in this period, what have we now signed off that was carried over from this year, and what is new that has come on it that people are attempting to achieve? I just think there is a point, he is making a point here about how this committee keeps tabs on what people are doing and where they're going, and is it still the direction that the council would wish it to take. And while we want initiative from these groups and we want to support them, nevertheless we have to make sure that they're not going down a tangent that none of us would really want them to go down. I'm not saying they are, I'm just saying we need to have some control over that. And I do think that it would be very valuable to show on a sheet almost, this is what we've achieved this year and we've finished it. And you actually went through it all, but where's that captured, if I can put it that way, that people can look it up very quickly and say, gosh, haven't they done a lot? Because I do get people saying, well, what's DMP doing? What's it doing? And actually, you're doing a hell of a lot. And we're not really capturing it in a way that makes it very quickly clear to people. So I'm sorry, I'm going rambling now. But I just think it would be really useful to separate those two things out. This is the first year. This is finished. Achieved, done, dusted. Post it up. Haven't we done well? Haven't we done well? And the group's done well. This is what we're carrying over, so we know what we're looking for at the end of the second year, and if things come in, it's added to it. It's just a suggestion.
Councillor Wilson, that's a very good point. I'll ask Dawn how to come back on that one.
It's an excellent point, actually. When Laura and I were discussing how to present this report, we originally did have a table with things that showed complete, and we thought it's too messy, we'll just summarise it all. But actually, there's great value in what you're suggesting, especially because we can get those positive messages out. So I think what Laura and I will take away is actually to come up with a succinct list of what's been achieved year one. A lot of the projects are over the whole 3 years, so lots of things are ongoing, but we can separate them out. Just to come back on the point about signing off changes to the action plan, we haven't made any changes to the action plan. We are working to the original action plan, which was agreed by this committee and adopted by stakeholders. And the Destination Management Plan Board, which the Chair sits on, has oversight of the delivery of the action plan. And if we were to think about taking something out completely or bringing in something completely new that didn't come out of the consultation that developed the DMP, then of course they would need to go through a decision-making process.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. It's always good to have targets for the future as well, and perhaps one of our future meetings we can have some future targets that we hope to achieve in the next 12 months would be good. Well, thank you. Members, do we have any other questions before? Councillor Ells.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple. Back on the countryside part again. You said we didn't have a very good response from the parishes. But I do notice they only had 6 weeks to do the survey. And although that sounds quite a long time, I'd imagine if you're fairly busy, and I've got quite a lot, 6 weeks is not all that long to do a survey of your area and get it back to us. I wouldn't have thought. Just a comment. The other thing is, it says, I've now lost it, under the Develop Rural Visitor Information Points, it says there'll be new electronic visitor activity data, possibly using Scout. I'm not entirely sure what that means, unfortunately. Are the visitors electronic or the sign?
Laura, would you like to explain to us? Thank you.
One of the things we were investigating, which may or may not happen with Scout, is a way of actually tracking visitor movement. So it's sort of technology that is a bit Big Brother, but it doesn't actually interfere with your data, but it does use mobile phone technology to people, it sort of pings data. So if they arrive at one point, so for example, a visitor information point, and then we have the attractions have a point as well. It can trigger if they actually do go to that point later on. It's quite complex, and we're not sure whether it would actually work. It does work in town centres. They use it to track movement in the town centre, to show movement in different streets, and it can be done within shops to show movement within stores. So, for example, we were looking at piloting that possibly in the museum to see how long our visitors dwell in different parts of the museum. The idea of actually extending it into the countryside was discussed with the owners of the technology. We're not quite sure if it would work, but it might be something that we could try as a pilot in one of the areas. But the idea as well is possibly electronic information in the visitor points, so visitors can, if they haven't got somebody to actually talk to there about the attractions for visitor information, we have a tablet or an electronic system so they can actually get the information in those points as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's technical enough. Any more technical would go straight over. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I just say, I wouldn't like us to get the parishes to get the impression that we left them out in the stick, shall we say again. We haven't done that. The officers have tried very hard, obviously, to do this, and obviously it's ongoing. So where we haven't picked up the data from the parishes, I'm sure they will be, as this plan progresses, be feeding us quite happily and enthusiastically. Members, any more questions? Oh, Councillor Lewins.
Thanks. Thank you. I was curious to know, I understand that there's more stuff to go on with the markets and things in Jubilee Square. I was wondering if the people that are using the present market, if they've been consulted about moving to Jubilee Square and how that works for them, if it feels good for them, and whether it works for loading, unloading, and whether it be different types of, whether it just be food, whether it be the same market holders that we have presently, or whether it could be things like antiques or something a little bit different perhaps. Thank you.
We've not got to that stage yet. There was a review of markets done about 18 months ago, which took into account the issue that markets are declining nationally, and our own market in Lockmeadow has declined steadily over the last few years. We've been able to halt that decline by making more use of the market hall and doing different things with that space. So the review that we did, some of the conclusions that came out of it were that Lockmeadow, isn't really the fantastic place because it's disconnected from the town centre, and a different site within the town centre might be better. So we're testing the concept with the farmers market once a month. You might have all seen today we've got a Christmas market out there. First time we've had one of those, which is great. And members were really keen to have a Christmas market. And we are encouraging already some of the Lockmeadow market stall holders to come and try the Friday market. So it's a slow process. We will consult with them, absolutely, of course. At the moment, there isn't a plan to do it. It's just something that will be considered in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any more questions? Thank you. Then I think we'll... can we have the wording for the new recommendation, and then we'll...
Okay, so the amended recommendation on the report is to note the update on the progress of the Destination Management 3-year action plan.
Councillor? Okay, thank you very much, members. Thank you. Noted, Julie. Thank you. Right, members, we'll move on to item 12. Review of Maidstone Culture and Leisure and Festivals and Events Activities. Before I ask Laura to speak on this, I think it would be helpful to advise you on the process that I intend to take on this item. After Mrs Dixon introduces the report, I will hear a statement from Councillor Revell, who will then should leave the meeting due to his other significant interests. We will then receive questions from members of the public, after which we will hear statements from Mr Scott from Maidstone Area Arts Partnership and Mr Sander from the Mellor organisation. At the end of this, we will hear from any visiting members, and then the debate will open to members of the committee. Councillor Revell, would you like to make your statement?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Obviously, you have had discussions with the legal department with the thought that I could be influenced by my residence in Moat Park. I had a telephone call this afternoon from the legal department, very late in the day. I think this has been handled very badly. In my previous authority, this would have been done at least a week before, so that the matter could have been sorted out. I asked why it was. Incidentally, if I were not a member of this committee, I would have come because, of course, I would have represented or wanted to represent the views of the residents of Bearsted. Would you have stopped me then? I'm asking the question.
Would you like to come in? Thank you. Councillor Revell, sorry.
Councillor Revell, I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Maidstone Borough Council in the legal department, and I'm aware that you were this afternoon telephoned by my colleague, who is the Deputy Monitoring Officer for the Council, concerning our consideration that Councillor may have a significant interest in this next item, and that we felt that this interest ought to be disclosed. Now, we've given Councillor Revell this advice, and it's his decision to take whether he continues in this meeting or whether he speaks, which he's entitled to do, and then we would ask him to leave the meeting before any further representations are made and before any vote is given.
I did ask in that telephone conversation the reason for this, and I think this is very interesting. The reason is I might be speaking because of the value of my house, that I might be against the Rambling Man because I would think that the concert would decrease the value of my home. Now, if this is so, and that was the only reason I was given, if you've got another reason, please give it to me. This would apply to anybody who lived within hearing distance of the Rambling Man concert, which applies to everyone who lives to the north, the south, the east and the west within earshot of this Rambling Man event. Now, you say you've assumed that I would speak against the Rambling Man. There was a letter in the Downs Mail last month berating me for, in the Downs Mail, praising the Rambling Man concert. Well, why wouldn't I? It's of an age of music that I grew up with. I quite like that music, but I did have concerns about the noise. I never at any one moment thought that I was arguing about the value of my house. Can you justify what you've just said?
Councillor Revell, I'm not justifying what my colleague earlier on advised you on specifically the value of your home. I am trying to clarify this evening that under consideration the legal department were concerned that you may have what is considered to be an other significant interest when considering the agenda item next on this list, which concerns the noise levels arising out of not just Rambling Man, but other events taking place throughout Moat Park in each year. And my colleague and myself were raising this issue to yourself privately prior to this meeting. And I do apologise for the late notice, but similarly, this was only raised to myself late last night, and I was only able to get in touch with colleagues to discuss the matter further this morning. So we reached you as soon as we possibly could, but in fact the papers were only delivered to my desk at the beginning of this week, which is Monday, and I was only able to have the discussion with both the head of legal partnership and the deputy head of legal partnership this afternoon. So we have, all three of us, considered this, and we're considering specifically your potential to be... I'm sorry? No, not at all. What we're saying is that you may have an other significant interest which you should be disclosing at the beginning of this meeting, which you did not do this afternoon.
I just said the only thing that I could think of, which you told me, was the value of my house. What other interest do I have? I don't own shares in or anything?
No, you don't, but you reside in and around the park.
Half of Maidstone?
But half of Maidstone residents are not in this room prepared to vote on the resolution which has been put forward today, Councillor Revel.
Okay, right, I accept that. Can I speak now before and then I'll leave? Mr. Chairman, if you're happy with that.
Yes, please. You can. I have to take the advice I've been given. I have. Councillor Nagy, you wish to?
Chairman, as everyone knows, I live the closest probably to Moat Park than anyone. So I think I better have advice, actually. And just speaking on Councillor Ravel's point, he actually didn't criticise the event itself. And all his publicity that I've read, he actually says it was a good event. All he was saying was the noise level monitored correctly? And I think that was the main complaint of most of Maidstone. And I've, in the past, especially with the social, when that used to be at Moat Park, have been to meetings where I've criticised that, and we've sat here with different officers assuring us that wouldn't happen again. So I think this is the most unusual decision I've ever seen or heard of in my time, because obviously... we are here as councillors, and if there's a personal view, then Moat Park, when I've complained about noise before, they say, oh, Dave, we live near Moat Park, what do you expect, it's Moat Park? And that's what's happened in the past with the social and stuff. But to actually, for this, something like this today, I think I would actually have to have clarification myself.
Councillor English, it's not normally in order, but do you wish to make... Sorry, you may come. It was helpful to the deliberations.
My understanding, sorry to disagree, but surely the test is whether a member of the council has a greater interest than the community which they represent and live in. That's the test, whether they have a greater interest than the community in which they live, work and represent. It is very hard on the substance of what's been said this evening to see that either councillor has a greater interest than the general public of Bearsted or High Street Ward. And that is the test that is applied in these circumstances. And secondly, at the end of the day, it is the councillor's decision whether to accept the advice of the legal officer or not. Personally, I'd stay.
Councillor Revel.
I'm quite happy to abide by the legal department's decision and your decision. I don't agree with it, but if that's the way you wish it to go, I'm happy to go along with you, Chairman, and I wouldn't like to detain you any more, because let's get on with the meeting.
Thank you. In summary, our advice to you this afternoon, Councillor Revel, was on a professional advisory level. If you do not agree with that, we cannot force you or any other councillors in this room to leave. However, we have attempted to explain to you why our rationale behind the advice we gave you. It is advice, it's not a decision. I would like to clarify that. If you do not choose to accept that advice, then that is fine, but we can please note it for the minutes. But I would also like to just mention there is a small legal risk associated with any decisions which arise from this agenda item, which I would like you to consider before making your decision.
Councillor Rivers, do you need some time? I'm feeling a little bit, because obviously we have, there is conflict of interest here, but rather than ask you to leave, you would be, after making a statement, would you be happy to stay but observe the meeting?
No, I'd like to make my statement and leave.
Okay, would you like to do that now?
I did actually go to the event, so I do know something about it, and I like the music. I had no complaints about the music, but there are problems with the noise.
Sorry, Councillor Revell, sorry. Can I stop you there? No, sorry, it's my fault. We're out of sync a little bit. I need the officer to present the first. No, my fault. Present, and then we go on to the list.
This report is actually mainly about two Maidstone Culture and Leisure events that the Council support financially and with officer time. It also provides an overview of two other events held on Council land. Festival and events directly support the Council's economic development strategy and the tourism destination management plan. Events are identified as one of the key growth areas that drive more visitors to the borough, supporting local businesses for maximum economic benefit whilst creating a significant contribution to the status and image of the county town. Events put Maidstone on the map, as it were. Maidstone has an established history and tradition of holding events and festivals that cover a diverse range of activities, from music to sporting events. Taking off our events from the Visit Maidstone for 2016, we have noted that there were over 638 events registered and logged on our system being promoted, 58 of those being main events with over 33 hires of Moat Park. I'll move on first of all to Proms in the Park. Proms is run and funded by Maidstone Borough Council. Parkwood Leisure, who manage the Hazlitt Theatre, provide the event management as part of their contract. The Council provides financial support of £14,000 per year, as well as staff resort in planning and marketing the event. The event took place this year on Saturday the 28th of May, the bank holiday weekend, with Maidstone Wind Symphony providing the headline performance. Approximately 1,800 to 2,000 people attended the event. There were concerns about whether the lack of fireworks this year would deter attendance. However, it is a free event, so there's never any guarantee of how many people will attend, and weather can play a major factor in attendance. Mid-Kent College provided student volunteers who helped the meet and greet, giving out programmes, and they're interested in getting more involved in the future. During the event, a survey of the audience was carried out to gauge the views on a number of issues. This was not a full consultation, but a simple survey of attendees. There were two main questions. Firstly, to ask their view regarding fireworks at the event, and secondly, their view on ticketing prices to attend the event. Over 60 questionnaires were completed. The results of the questionnaire are in Appendix 1. The key results are, of the people who attended this year, 28% were not from Maidstone, were not Maidstone residents. 32% attended with children. 48% preferred the event to stay in May and have no fireworks, and 32% didn't mind. So overall, about 80% weren't bothered about the fireworks. 20% would move it to September with fireworks. 54% would be prepared to pay £5 or less for a ticket, 7% up to £10 and 16% would not pay. Another 11% would pay if there were the fireworks. And 13% of those attending had a friend or a family member taking part. Promise in the Park adds a great cultural event to Maidstone's programme of events. However, the number of attendees is modest in comparison to the cost to run the event and is calculated at between £7 and £10 per person. The survey also suggests that a third of the audience are not Maidstone residents, although it's recognised that the economic benefit visitors bring to the town. Moving on to the Mela. The Mela was set up in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks with the intention of creating an event that promoted positive perceptions of different cultures and provided a celebratory, inclusive community and family-focused event for the Maidstone district. Until this year, it has been held in Moat Park and has been free to attend, with the council supporting the event both financially and with staffing resources. The event is budgeted at £35,500 to run, and a grant from Arts Council and income from stallholders reduces the budgeted contribution from the council to £15,550, not including staff costs. However, in 2015, the net cost to the council was £18,674, even with a reduction in the size of the event. The Mela has evolved over the years into a general community event with more community and charity groups than food and drink sellers. A complete review was required given the drift away from the objectives, current budget challenges and the lack of internal resources at the council to deliver the event. Delivering the 2015 event was extremely challenging and pushed over budget, with the increasing costs of staging, infrastructure, stewarding and reduced income from stalls and the need to employ an external event manager. This year, a presence was maintained for the Mela, whilst a full consultation was undertaken with stakeholders on its future. Following a meeting with Cohesion Plus, our delivery partners for the event in February, to discuss the proposal, the idea of the Street Mela in Maidstone Town Centre was suggested. This was seen as having the advantage of taking a taste of a multicultural event to a wider, different audience in the town centre and engaging with the wider community in a consultation on its future. The BME Forum brought volunteers who helped the consultation process on the day. A summary of the consultation is in Appendix 2, and from this information, 72% of people who took part in the consultation had heard of the Mela. 47% had actually been to the Mela in the past, and of those people who were asked who had visited it in previous years, 75% rated it as good or very good, 81% rated the music and entertainment as good or very good, and 69% rated the food offer as good. 55% rated the children's activities as good or very good, and 83% would recommend it to friends and family. 69% of all the consultees said that having a multicultural event is important to Maidstone. And the 4 most important things that people want to see in a future multicultural event are food and drink, musical acts and entertainment, children's activities, and local goods and products for sale. Timing-wise, summer or autumn, in fact, summer came out strongly. However, bearing in mind that the Street Mela took place on the 11th of September and was a very warm day, it's possibly considered as still being part of our summer season. The other issue that came out of the consultation was location, with the majority saying that in a park is a good location, and many naming Moat Park specifically for the future. If I move on now to large events in Moat Park. These are events where the park is hired by an external event organiser. The Big Day Out. This was the first year of a large family music festival in Moat Park on the 25th and 26th of June. Unfortunately, it was a very wet weekend, especially on the Saturday, but with better weather on the Sunday. There was one main stage, a very small second stage and a fair amount of fairground rides and children's entertainers. Main acts were Diversity, Hoosier and Lightning Seeds. The event was seen as well run and any issues were dealt with quickly, including traffic tailbacks to the park, which were the main issues on the Saturday. There were 7 noise complaints, although the music was not particularly loud, bearing in mind the family audience. Rambling Man. This was the second year for the event in Moat Park, although this is the first year for this company since taking over the brand. Glamping was offered on site and camping in the nearby cricket and rugby club. It was a classic rock festival with country and blues as well as rock, and it attracted an international audience. All the hotels in the area were full, not just during the festival, but during the build period. The grammar school was used for event parking, allowing Moat Park users to use the car parks. Using the Event Impacts Toolkit and information provided by the event organisers, we can provide an estimate of the economic impact to the borough. This is a standard toolkit used nationwide. Tickets were sold in 23 countries. 150 local contractors were employed during the build and during the event. The organisers themselves booked over 280 bed nights, not including those for the artists. So the final estimate, putting all the information into the toolkit, is an estimate of around 2.5 million to the local economy. There were 45 Stage 1 complaints and 4 have progressed to Stage 2. All but 1 were about noise, which came from residents living due east of the stage. There was virtually no noise audible from Moat Park behind the leisure centre or from Moat Road and Moat Avenue. The maximum noise levels were largely maintained throughout the weekend, although there were 5 instances on the Saturday evening where the noise levels went above the levels set. During the debrief with the Safety Advisory Group after the event, these issues were raised and the organisers are putting in measures to eliminate that next year, including appointing specialist noise management company who will look at stage direction and equipment. There were no other concerns raised from licensing, NBC Food Safety, Health and Safety, Building Control, Environmental Services, NHS or Kent Police. The next section is on the noise levels and number of days for noisy events. There has been some confusion in the festivals and events policy over the number of noisy events permitted in Moat Park. The Noise Council Environmental Noise Control at concerts provides guidance which refers to concerts only. However, there's many other events not classified as concerts that can cause disturbance and have an impact on the area. What we have done is we've tried to differentiate between these types of events and are suggesting an amendment to the festivals and events policy. The proposal is to introduce 3 categories of events. Category A events are amplified noise profile, which extends beyond the boundary of the park and will be clearly audible at properties within and surrounding the park and are significant. These, for example, would be music, concerts or high-profile events. Category B events would be where the number of participants requires changes to the normal use of the park and the surrounding infrastructure. It would have a lower noise profile but utilise amplified noise to communicate with audience or have live or recorded music as part of the entertainment. And an example would be a charity run or cultural festival. And Category C events would be events with little or no impact on the surrounding area and no amplified noise. For example, smaller community events, nature talks and the like. The idea behind introducing these categories would be to help balance the impact of the different types of events and provide clarification to stakeholders on the amount of event days that can be expected and their likely impact on the surrounding community as we set out to deliver the festival and events policy vision. Due to the anticipated impact of each type of event, each category has a graduated limit to ensure that these events with the greatest impact are restricted. Where appropriate, a music noise level will be applied which is measured 1 metre from the facade of any noise-sensitive property or locations identified by the Environmental Enforcement Team through consultation with event organisers as appropriate. All Category A and B events are reviewed by the Safety Advisory Group as well. Although setting the noise limits in terms of dBA is convenient, it doesn't always take into account low-frequency noise, and the suggestion is that it may be necessary to set additional criteria in terms of low-frequency noise or apply additional conditions on a case-by-case basis. The proposed limits per year are as follows. Category A events, number of events up to 3 with a maximum number of days of 6. Category B, up to 8 events with a maximum number of 12, and C being unlimited. That's for Moat Park. For Watman Park, Category A would be 1 event with a maximum of 2 days. Category B, 2 events for 4 days, and C unlimited. It should be noted that the Noise Council guidance suggests the maximum number of days for concerts with a 65 dB limit as 3 days per year. A venue hosting more than 3 days of concerts is recommended to have a limit of 15 dB above the normal background levels. For Moat Park, the daytime limit is likely to be approximately 60 dB, which could be reduced by up to 20 dB in the evening. These limits would significantly impact on Moat Park's attractiveness to event organisers as a concert venue and the social and economic benefits of hosting concerts and festivals in the grounds of the park. The proposed noise limits are such that the impact on communities will be manageable whilst retaining commercial viability of the park as a Category A venue. As previously explained, the levels for Category A are such that the music will be clearly audible at properties surrounding the park and significantly louder than the normal background levels. To ensure the impact is restricted, Category A levels will be required to finish by 11 p.m. and they will be distributed over and 10:30 on a Sunday, and will be distributed over the festival season, which is May to September, to ensure that these events are not concentrated. The noise limits proposed are greater than those recommended in the guidance, and members need to consider whether the impact on residents is significant enough to reduce the availability of Moat Park as a Category A venue and compromise the delivery of the policy vision. And again, the current wording and the new wording is in the report for members to consider.
Thank you, Laura, for that very concise and in-depth report. Thank you very much. A lot of hard work there. Thank you. Right, members, just before we move on, and I ask Councillor Rebel to make his statement, just wanted, please bear in mind when we get to it, I'm going to ask you to ask questions in order, 1, 2 and 3, on each subject. So just bear that in mind. We're not going to have a free-for-all. I wanted to take them in order and discuss them in order. But before we move on, Councillor Rebel, would you like to make your statement now? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really was trying to bring some common sense to the discussion tonight, and I'm disappointed that I won't be here to listen to your excellent discussion afterwards. First of all, we hear about the noise level, which is the highest that the Noise Council recommend, which is 65 decibels. And remember, this is for all festivals and of course, directed towards big events like Glastonbury, which are in rural sites. We are not a rural site, we're in an urban area, and therefore many people, not just me, I'm not the only one, is affected by what you called music. The truth of the matter is that the homes do not receive music. Because of the way sound travels, the voices, the higher notes disappear, and all of those of us who live within earshot of Moat Park, and it's a very large proportion of the population of Maidstone, hear just this deep thumping, thump, thump, thump. It's the sort of noise you hear from teenagers when they're driving their cars through the high street. You know, you don't hear the music, you just hear it boom, boom, boom. And it is so, oh, you've experienced it as well. Yes. So it's not just me. And the only reason that the legal department have come up with this ban is because of the value of my house. Not because I'm in Moat Park. No other reason. That does not seem to me to be common sense. Now, there's no reason why the noise level could not be set at a lower level. Let's say 55 decibels. You can work with that. I did go to the concert. Now, I do have to declare an interest in this. I had a free ticket, Mr. Chairman, if you would note that in the minutes, and I do declare that. I had a free ticket from the Rambling Man. I suspect that next year the legal department will recommend that they don't give me a free ticket that I have to pay to go in. I wouldn't mind paying, quite honestly, to go. Now, and I did speak with the sound engineer, the independent sound engineer. He is actually paid by the Rambling Man, not by this council. Therefore, his independence is compromised. So I'm not going to tell you all that he told me. But he did point out to me that he wasn't invited to the site until after it had been set up. So really his advice on how the setup should be was irrelevant because they weren't going to change. Now, the interesting thing for me going to the site and being inside in the centre, I thought it would be hell because there's a group on each corner. But in fact, it was quite pleasant. And if you went to the group that you wanted to listen to, you could hear them and you can hear the music. You could enjoy it. But one of the reasons was because the loudspeakers were up high. They were above head level. So we got the music as it passed above. Ethereal, beautiful music, in fact. But of course, the problem is that sound keeps going. And high loudspeakers are going to broadcast that sound to all quarters of Maidstone. If in fact the loudspeakers had been tilted slightly forward, the sound would have been going towards the audience. And they would have wanted the sound to be reduced to 55 or less because it would have been too loud. So the other point I would like to make, there were 5 incidents on one day about the level of noise. And it was quite clear to me that the sound engineer operating the levels of sound had a very delicate control of the sound coming out of the loudspeakers, because at a moment he could reduce it. Now, there is at all of these concerts a great temptation that when the big act comes on, the sound is ramped up. Great for teenagers, not for me. And it was quite clear that if he was told to take the sound level down, he would take it down. But it went up another 4 times. He was playing. He was just testing to see if the officers would really take his alteration of the sound seriously. And they did not. And you heard the report. The other problem is that the concert is actually situated at the highest point in Moat Park. If in fact it was lower in the valley, much of this sound that is complained about outside would be contained within the valley. I only learnt this, I'm not a sound engineer, but I did learn a lot on that particular weekend. The other problem for residents is that if they want to make a complaint about the noise, the council does not respond to it. They're given a telephone number, which, much to their surprise, they discover is going straight to the organisers. Now, that's not the way to treat your residents. This council should be big enough to do the complaints on behalf of the residents if the residents do complain. Obviously, you need to have... There are some people who hate this sort of music and some people are going to be against it. I'm not against these events. I think they're great. But I think there needs to be much better control than we're getting at the moment. At the last meeting, I did complain about the financial reporting, which was conspicuous by its absence. And I give the officers this time their due. They have made an attempt to give us a financial report. And if you look at page 47, I won't linger too long on this, Mr. Chairman, but I noticed that the spectator spending was £1,709,630, which seems to me to be very accurate, although I have no way of checking whether that is correct or not, and that there were 16,762 spectator admissions. Presumably that's because of the number of tickets that were sold or given out. If I hadn't have gone, presumably it would have been 16,761. So it was very accurate. So it meant the income from each spectator was approximately £100, give or take a few pounds. Because I didn't pay it, I didn't know what the cost of the ticket was. So I don't know whether that £100 was the cost of the ticket or there was some other income. But again, and I won't go into this deeply, I would like to know more about the finance. And then at the bottom of the page, it says this is based on attendee spending, £665,745, based on 2,700 attendee admissions. I don't quite square that with the 16,762 spectator admissions, but there you are. I think I've sort of given a flavour of what I would have asked if I was allowed to say, but since I'm not allowed to say, I won't elaborate. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ribble, for your contribution, and I'm sure that some of the points you raised will be taken up by the officers.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, members. I'm now going to take questions from members of the public. Could I ask Professor Edward Thompson, would you like to approach the Speaker's table? Thank you. If you're not averse with that, it's press the centre button and then on and off when you...
A warning, déjà vu. This was submitted in writing. Our Council is aware of the helpful suggestions made by the independent sound consultant from the 2016 Rambling Man event that, quote, it would cause much less widespread noise if the main stage were sited not at the top of the hill, but at the bottom. So the upward sloping ground would absorb much of the force of the sound without in any way detracting from the audience appreciation. He also said that the power of the sound system was better suited to Glastonbury than to Maidstone.
Thank you very much, sir. I'd like to reply. I will reply. Thank you very much. In the report, Maidstone Cultural Leisure Festival and Events Review, tabled later at this committee, section 2.5.6, sets out that the safety advisory debrief with the event organiser discussed all the noise reports. This was the first year for this event company to run this event since taking on the brand. They are using what they have learned this year about the venue, taking all the information on board and looking at hiring specialist music noise consultants next year who will advise on the stage positioning and equipment. Did you have a supplementary question for my reply?
Yes, please. This is also written previously. The consultant also said what you probably already have heard from passing cars with their radios blaring away with repetitive, monotonous noise, namely, the official Noise Council Code of Practice, which you claim the organisers must follow, says, and I quote, even if the 65 decibels is met, unreasonable disturbance can occurring because of low frequency noise. So the bottom line is it OTT annoyance? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you. I now have a question from Mrs. E. Moira Thompson. Would you like to come to the table? Thank you.
In explanation that I've been in long correspondence with Maidstone Borough Council about the noise from the park, and I declare an interest. I live in the Audley village, and over 2 years, and I have correspondence this deep, I have not had the kind of information fed back to me that's come from Mrs. Dixon tonight. And my written question, to some extent, has been preempted, but I'd like to read what I submitted, please.
Yeah, please read your question. Thank you.
On what authority does MBC ignore the Noise Council Code of Practice on the number of days of which noise reaching 65 decibels a kilometre or more away from the event is allowed to be inflicted on residents? The Noise Council Code of Practice was prepared by the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health in 1995 to avoid disturbance and annoyance from large music events involving high-powered amplification. It's been under review for the past 6 years because 65 decibels is known to cause nuisance, but is still quoted by the Health and Safety Executive in September 2016 and used by independent acoustic consultants. I spoke to a member of the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, and they told me they'd given up on the review because there were too many complaints about what they were trying to do and too much vested interest. According to reaching 65 decibels a kilometre or more away are only allowed in an urban park on 3 days a year. However, I've been informed verbally by a local councillor of my ward and in writing by an MBC officer who's present tonight and has to some extent preempted my question, that MBC committee has decided to increase the number of days for these events to 8 a year. In my neighbourhood, we were disturbed by amplified drumbeat on 3 midsummer weekends in 2016. I include the mud rolling event, which was also accompanied by amplified drumbeat for some reason, and it was extremely disturbing. Ramblin' Man was the most prolonged and distressing, 26 hours of it unrelenting in 2015 and 23 hours in 2016. The prospect that this and more could be the norm for us is appalling. MBC taxpayers are having statutory noise inflicted on them by the very organisation which is charged with protecting them from this nuisance. Statutory noise nuisance was defined by DEPFRA in April 2015 as noise unreasonably and substantially interfering with the use or enjoyment of a home or injuring health or likely to injure health. In my neighbourhood, people not fit to travel are driven from their homes by the noise and at financial expense. A few were made ill, and one immediate neighbour managed to die in peace in her own bed a few hours before the testing noise, so-called testing noise, for Ramblin' Man started on the Friday evening. I hesitate to suggest that Ramblin' Man and similar events should be transferred to the site to which Council English managed to transfer the social, because noise of this level would probably still disturb residents for miles around, and I have friends in Bearsted who were seriously disturbed. These events, which are largely for the pleasure of non-MBC and KCC residents, should not be held in urban environments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can sit there for a moment. Thank you. I can reply to that. It's a bit long, ladies and gentlemen, so please bear with me when I reply to this very important question. In the report of the Maidstone Cultural Level Festival and Events Review tabled later at this committee, 2.6.7 of the report explains the Noise Council Code of Practice on environmental noise control at Council is guidance only that suggests the maximum number of days. Maidstone Borough Council's Festival and Events Policy proposes a different limit that is manageable whilst retaining commercial viability for the park as a venue. The review of the Code of Practice has yet to be released. Other local authorities that host music concerts are no longer following the guidance that are setting the number of days and the maximum music noise levels as appropriate to their venue, often this exceeding the guidance both in number of day and maximum noise levels. The review of the Code of Practice has yet to be released. I'm repeating myself, sorry. It's the old glasses, sorry, I should have gone to Specsavers. In the report, the Festivals and Events Policy that was adapted by the committee in February 2016 did include a maximum number of events as 5 and the number of days as 8. However, the recommended amendment in the report tabled later at this committee provides a greater breakdown of category of events in the Category A and Category B events. Category A events, which are large amplified music concerts, are recommended at a maximum of 3 events or up to 6 days in total. There were only 2 weekends with amplified music concerts in 2016, not 3. Other events that can cause a disturbance, but not music concerts, were the Race for Life event and the Dragon Boat race event. The 2 music events were enjoyed by local people, particularly the Big Day Out, which had a local family audience, and the Rambling Man, where 6,700 people were from the local area, 25% of the audience. Rambling Man and the Big Day Out are not Maidstone Borough Council events, with the events organisers choosing to locate the venue to this event. The social festival was already in final discussions with the county showground before the 2015 event in Moat Park took place. It was their intention to move the festival to the showground in a more suitable venue where the outdoor facility is now and the event has grown. Did you have a supplementary question, having heard my reply?
Yes, I will have a supplementary question. First of all, I've lived for 35 years in 2 London boroughs. I've lived in Manhattan and Washington, D.C. I've never experienced such noise. And I would ask the question, I wonder if Mrs. Dixon or some other officer would like to come and spend 26 hours on my patio the next time there's an event, if it's producing noise of 67 decibels on the side of Moat House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tom, for your contribution. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before we continue, could we have this switched off because it's absolutely driving me crackers?
I was just going to ask the same.
Members, I think we'll take a quick 5-minute break here before we continue. Thank you. Thank you, members. Can we reconvene the meeting? Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you. I have a third question from members of the public on the Rambling Man, question 3. From AC and JM Gold relating to the Rambling Man. They are not present this evening. I will read out their question, and just to let you know, there will be a written reply to this. We live in Moat House, Moat Park, directly in the line of fire from the speakers on the stage at the festival. Positioned as we are, we get the worst of both worlds. Not hearing the music itself, but the constant thump of the beat over 2 days, with very little respite. After the first Rambling Man weekend, we followed the council's complaints procedure, but its response was aggressively unhelpful, focusing on the money that the festival brought in. There was no evidence from any effort has been made to consider the impact on local residents who live in or close to the park. This disappointing and negative response convinced us we had no alternative but to get right away from the park for the duration of the festival. Being forced out of our home was difficult. One of us is disabled with a wheelchair and very expensive. We should not have to move out of our home to avoid such events. In our view, Moat Park is a totally inappropriate venue for this event of this nature, surrounded as it is by housing. We know there are alternatives available. Our question, does the committee share our view that Moat Park is a totally inappropriate venue for music festivals such as the Rambling Man, which should be held away from people's homes? If not, how do you justify their view? And as I say, there's a reply, written reply going to these ladies and gentlemen. Going forward on events, public speakers, Mr. Scott has withdrawn his statement for tonight. It was more appropriate for another meeting we should be held in the future. Can I ask Mr. Sander to come forward and speak on behalf of the Mellor?
Good evening.
Sorry, I don't think to indicate about 3 minutes, but can you do it? How long do you need?
I'll be as quick as I can.
Thank you.
I'll take the watch off, 3-4 minutes. Firstly, I should declare an interest. My wife works for Maidstone Borough Council, but my working relationship with the council precedes her employment here. Just don't want any phone calls later on. The legal department. So my name is Govinda Sander. I work for, or I get my salary from 2 organisations, Cohesion Plus, which is an arts organisation, and a charity called the Kent Equality Cohesion Council. I've been working with Maidstone Borough Council since 2003 on the Maidstone Miller. And outside of the work with Maidstone Miller, we work with different local authorities. We deliver events in Gresham, Dartford, Tunbridge Moorling, Tunbridge Wells, obviously Harry Maidstone. And they range from Tunbridge Wells Miller to the Maidstone Miller to St George's Day celebrations, the Christmas lights switch on. So it's quite a diverse range of festivals and events that we organise. So in terms of the Maidstone Miller specifically, I said I've been involved since its inception. I think it was at 2003 when Morel de Souza was the mayor. And it's been a kind of a genuine kind of partnership. And our roles have really been around kind of community engagement, helping with some of the fundraising, so Arts Council, England funding that we've been successful in raising, and focusing on the artistic side, whereas Maidstone Borough Council focuses on the kind of stalls and the infrastructure. So that was the kind of the working relationship that we've had. And over the last 12, 13 years, obviously the Miller has evolved. Certainly in the last couple of years, due to, I think, tightening financial situation, not just in Maidstone, but with other local authorities, it's been a little bit more harder to organise and put together. But nonetheless, we will see this year from the kind of consultations and the feedback that I've had, that there is a real kind of love and commitment to the Miller from the residents of Maidstone. The way the Mellor's evolved out, the term Miller actually comes from the Indian subcontinent. It basically means a fair or gathering. But the way we do all our work, be it St George's Day, Christmas Day, the Mellors and everything else, is about using these events to bring all communities together. So we deliberately, from day one, focused not just on kind of communities and artistic practice on Indian subcontinent. We've tried to use the term Mellah as a way to bring everyone together. You know, it's about kind of, you know, promoting cohesion and that kind of sense of belonging. So that was the reason, in terms of the kind of Maidstone Mellah, it has been, I feel, really successful, is that we're not just looking and working in one particular community, we're trying to work with the communities of Maidstone. And that's kind of reflected in the kind of the artistic output. So, you know, you'll have, for example, you know, Nepalese communities have been actively involved. Members from local Eastern European communities have been involved, you know, from communities from the Indian subcontinent, African communities. It's been a good kind of representation. What's happened in the last couple of years, I just feel that due to obviously tight funding situations, we've not been able to do as much kind of community engagement and work beyond the Mellah itself. So the example I give is that in 2014, for example, we had a parade working with local schools. We worked with some 400 local children from 8 local schools who then took part in a Mellah parade through the town centre. So things like that have kind of dropped by the kind of wayside. We used to also work with local schools where, you know, we'd commission artists to go in and work around creating performances. You know, for example, you know, Bhangra dancing and African drumming, and the children would come to the Mellah and perform that. So that kind of stuff has kind of dropped out by the wayside due to obviously kind of funding pressures and everything else. But nonetheless, you know, in terms of the Mellah in Moat Park and what happened this year in terms of the street Mellah, there is definitely genuine kind of engagement there. I just wanted to say a couple of words around the financing. So the way we've worked with Maidstone Borough Council, we've had a service level agreement. So, for example, this year, Maidstone Borough Council paid us £4,000 to help work around the kind of engagement and do the street Mellah. But we used that £4,000 to bring in an additional £9,000 from Arts Council England. So we used that, you know, to lever in other money. 2014, again, I think we was paid about £5,000 by Maidstone Borough Council, and we used that money to lever in £8,000 from Arts Council England. And that's how we work, not just with Maidstone Borough Council, other local authorities. We utilise what funding is available from local authority and then use that to get funding from Arts Council England. So it kind of supplements the event, and it just makes that pound kind of stretch a little bit longer. In terms of next year, I mean, I had a look at the papers which were sent through. I just think whatever you decide to do, I think the Mellah is a good event, and there's a real community ethos there, and there's genuine commitment now. But you need to be realistic that what you're going to be expecting as well. There's some figures and stuff that you've mentioned that, you know, if that is what is going to be potentially, offered out, you just need to be realistic about what can be achieved. But whatever it is, if the Mellah does take place next year, I just think there needs to be the community focus bit needs to come in again, just, you know, in terms of that kind of engagement, you know, be it with local schools, community groups. I mean, that is really important, and you can't really stress that enough. And I also feel that there should be a town element as well as a park element, whether that's maybe potentially working with the schools and having some kind of, you know, a parade or some kind of activity in the town centre. It's all achievable and it all can be done. And, you know, everywhere I go in Maidstone and the people I talk to, there is a genuine commitment, so I can't stress that enough, and there is a real community event. It's not a commercial event. I appreciate some of the events in Moat Park are commercial. It's free to enter. Normally starts about 12, finishes about 6. It's a celebration of food, music and dance. And people will turn up 11, 11:30, regardless of the weather, and they'll sit there till 6:30. And you'll get people not just from the town, you see people coming from the villages surrounding the area, and it is a real family event. So hopefully, you know, working in partnership, be it with myself or whoever else, you know, you look at that. I think there is an opportunity to kind of expand and develop the Mellah again. Okay. About 5-6 minutes, apologies.
That's fine, Mr. Sander. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your time and your contribution, which I'm sure the committee have noted. Last but not least, Can I ask Councillor Daly to come forward? I thought you knew my sense of humour by now. Thank you, Mr. Councillor Daly.
Well, Chairman, I'm hoping you can hear me, because I haven't heard very much of the conversations this evening. I don't know whether these machines work, but they certainly don't work at the back of the room. Anyway, I didn't hear very much of Mrs. Dixon's report, so if I say anything that's already been covered, I apologise already. I'm here to talk about the Proms in the Park, part of this discussion. And on the papers, I'm quite interested to read that, in fact, the events and festivals policy is, in fact, to develop a festivals and events programme, not to diminish it, I would hope. And it goes on in your report here that keeping Maidstone Borough an attractive place for all by providing a wide range of quality cultural events. Providing, well, I suppose, and giving opportunities for other people to provide at the same time. But in fact, we are left with very little that we provide. We used to have a river festival, it's gone. We used to have jazz festivals, they've gone. And we're left with very few things now. The Mellor we've been talking about earlier, and now Proms in the Park is under pressure. It's one of the quality productions that's available in Maidstone. It's got nothing to do with rambling men or loose women. It's one of our own things, which we instituted probably something up to 10 years ago. It's a mirror of the one that takes place in Leeds Castle. It has already, I think, attracted its own audience. One of its attractions, of course, is its venue. It's outdoors and it's very pleasant on a spring evening or a late spring evening. But, of course, it is dependent on the weather, and therein lies a problem. But Maidstone, you know, has some very, very good cultural activities in the music field. We have the Maidstone Wind Symphony, which produced its music last year. We have the Maidstone Symphony Orchestra, that produces 5 excellent concerts a year of world class. The Maidstone Winds is also very highly regarded in its own field. And the Choral Union, of course, is over 100 years old as well. So they're all part of the county town. And we've heard, what I did hear about Mr. Dixon's production was that the county town is important for its own sake and needs to attract people to spend money here. And I did hear, I think I heard £189 million. It's an awful lot of money. But why do they come here? They do come for a variety of reasons. And one of them will be these kinds of events. But if you're starting to talk about the event not being a free event anymore, I think in Watman Park, I think there are difficulties attached to that which you should consider when you're looking at this tonight. To think in terms of paying to go in, there are multiple ways into Watman Park, and it is a public park after all, and will be open from sun up to sundown on most days, and people would go into that park in any case during the day, whether or not there's a concert there, to enjoy the facilities, most of which are allied to young people and to very small children, and it's a very pleasant place to go. People go to fish in there, for example. So they'd already possibly be in the park before midday, and unless you're going to eject them, then they're going to be there, and they won't have paid to go in there. So if you're going to think in terms of issuing tickets, then good luck. You'll have to find some way of monitoring who goes in, and I should think the cost of doing that will be considerable. But May is a bit of a variable month for weather. And the last weekend in May, which is the bank holiday weekend, is notorious for being funny with the weather. So if you have a ticket you've paid for and you go and it pours with rain, I think you'll be looking for a refund. I would. So then you'd have the problem of refunding tickets and the costs that go with that as well. So all I'm trying to say is that it ain't as easy as it sounds on paper, just to change from being a free event, which is paid for by community charge payers and others, of course, coming from outside. I know there are people come from outside. But it is a quality event, and it is one which the Borough Council itself started, not because of public pressure, but because they wanted to put on something which would attract people for its own sake. So all I'm saying to you is you're going to make the decisions tonight, but you're being asked to take a decision which I think is highly complex, possibly difficult to produce, and brings in its train all sorts of problems which probably you may have not considered. So that's that. So all I'm saying is, please, when you're doing this tonight, think in terms also that a community charge, and we know that actually, if it had taken some advice done some years ago, the cultural side of our business within the council should have been able to have ring-fenced 0.5% of the revenue budget, which would itself have produced between £50,000 and £75,000 a year to be used for this kind of event. So please, when you are considering this, just remember the things that I've thought not to be difficult and obstructive, but constructive, I hope, in your deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daly, for your contribution. Thank you. Councillor English, without comment.
Mr. Chairman, members, officers, there is a tendency, I think, sometimes to see culture, leisure and events as a drain on resources and to assume that the only thing we can ever do is cut. Like the much-mentioned salami sausage, and eventually you cut so much there isn't anything left. Quite a lot of authorities over the years have taken that view, but generally speaking, there have been quite a number of successful exponents of alternative strategies. And we have to realise that if Maidstone, which is, apart from these castles, not a natural tourist destination, is going to be a tourist destination, then it does have to have something, whether it's Maidstone Beer Festival, which was a big draw when I was growing up, or other events like this, to draw people in. So that's just a general observation. Done properly, these events, although they do cost money, can actually be broadly profitable for the local authority and the community, but it does need some radical thinking. Unfortunately, some of the radical ideas, as Councillor Daly has indicated, are not necessarily very straightforward. The simplest one, which is talked about here in relation to proms in the park, or rather it appears simple, is charging for admission. Now, I remember some years ago that I actually suggested, I think, this very idea in relation to the sadly underused small amphitheatre in the town centre. And at that time, that was looked into and officers concluded it was simply too complicated to deal with admissions and exits from that small facility. Now, that has got a grand total of 2 entrances and exits. If we can't control admissions to an amphitheatre that size, I think it's going to be quite complicated to actually do it for proms in the park. I'm not saying we can't, and that there aren't other ways to raise money, and we should always be looking at supporting events and turning them, if possible, into profitable events. But it's not going to be simple and straightforward to look at just charging straight admissions. The worst thing to do is, as Councillor Daly suggested, set up a vast administration and actually cost us more to enforce than we actually gain in admission prices, which could actually happen. Going on to the Mellor, I think, first of all, I knew Councillor De Souza was the originator, and I don't think 9/11 ever crossed his mind. What did cross his mind was celebrating the cultural diversity of Maidstone's many communities. And the Mellor was a very successful event. It, like many other events, time wore on, initial enthusiasm wore out slightly, considerable numbers of the core organising group retired, moved, died, and so we ended up in a situation where the event needs rethinking, relaunching, reconsideration. But it would be a great loss if this event were not to continue under its rebranded title, because it has become, as Mr. Sanders said, a very much appreciated event. And in this world where community seems to be set against community with increasing frequency, this sort of event is actually very necessary, leaving aside its pleasurable value. Well, I do not believe, however, that it has any future whatsoever as a street mellow in the centre of Maidstone. I know quite a few people that attended said event, and the feedback was universally not very good. That's not to say it shouldn't have taken place. It was far, far better than to hold that event than not hold it, so please don't get me wrong about that. But this event needs a large space to be successful. Finally, turning to approving the amendments in the festivals and events policy, unsurprisingly for a High Street ward member, noise nuisance is a common complaint which we have. It has to be said that it isn't a simple matter of decibels. Quite often it's the type of music that's played, and I think cognizance does have to be taken of the fact that if you're playing rap music or hip-hop or garage music or certain types of music, it is going to have more of an effect at a lower decibel rate than the simple indicator would suggest. That was certainly the case when the much missed in certain quarters, but certainly not in mine, Atomic's nightclub was operating in what's now the housing area of Hart Street. So it's not simple or straightforward, but I would say a balance has to be struck. We do have to deal with breaches. We do have to take account of people's residential requirements and be as considerate as possible. But at the end of the day, Moat Park has been holding events for over 200 years, well before it was a public park. It's had military reviews, it's had cricket matches involving 22 men of Kent against 15 of England on horseback, you name it, it's had it. And some of those events were very big and very noisy. I'm not saying that all the rules go out of the window, but there's a balance to be struck. And I do not want to get us into a situation as a local authority where we go down the course of what's happened in a large number of London authorities, where entertainment venues, live events, public participation of any sort has been squeezed out, and all you get is shops, offices and houses and nothing else. So we mustn't overreact. So I welcome the commitment to tighten up on breaches and to deal considerately with the residences, but I do think we have to realise that this is a public park that has been used for entertainment purposes for a very, very long time, and that has to be taken into account in any consideration. It's not about the money, although that's important, but it's about the fact of having a balance between the interests of residents and the interests of the wider public, both from Maidstone and around it. And one very final minor point, which isn't on the agenda, but one thing the council could do to make events in Maidstone more successful is please deliver on the promises that have been made about making Jubilee Square, for example, easier to hire. It is still far too complicated, far too expensive for charities and organisations. We should be seeking to cover our costs and maybe a little bit on top, but we shouldn't be seeking extortionate amount of money for events from charities. One of my fellow councillors wanted to organise quite a modest event on Jubilee Square for a cancer charity. Couldn't happen because of the vast array of both financial and other obstacles that were put in the way. So can't we do something about actually delivering on those promises to make Jubilee Square and other parts of our town centre, but particularly that one, usable space.
Thank you, Councillor English. Very informative. Thank you. I'll just say before we start that these are not notings. These are definite decisions to be made, members. And going forward, obviously, we need to look, especially with finances going to be even tighter, ways of financing things. I won't repeat that I've been away and we're doing some research, but I think we need to bottom out exactly what we want to achieve in the borough and the way we take these three items forward tonight. So, first of all, can I take questions on proms in the park? Sorry, I'm going to ask Mrs. Howard to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to respond to something that came up in two of the speakers about charging, perhaps charging for proms and the difficulties of that. We did run a very successful charged for event in Watman Park this year. We did a film outdoor cinema event and we ticketed that and we sold the tickets and it wasn't a big problem. We did it through the Hazlitt Theatre box office and we had people on the entrances taking the tickets, so it was quite easy to do.
Councillor Fort.
How realistic would it be to get Arts Council funding and sponsorship?
For what event?
I thought we were talking about proms in the park.
Getting Arts Council funding is getting more and more difficult. Cohesion Plus, who we heard from earlier, been very successful at getting it for the Mellor for many, many years now. Arts Council will not fund generally events on an ongoing basis. You can sometimes get them to give you SeedCon funding for something new that you've proven that is going to be sustainable without their funding in the future. So it is getting more and more difficult. What they want to see is a plan for sustainability, and that's the trick of it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Nagy.
Thank you, Chairman. When it says to continue support proms in the park, does that mean there's a limit on the money, or because it's just a general statement, isn't it? Is that just off us the time, or both? And introducing the ticket, of course. But the thing is, if we do continue, if we vote for that as it is, does that mean the money's been put aside already? Because often we're told there is no money for events. But obviously, if there is to continue to support it, there must be some amount put aside already. And would we know that sum at this moment in time?
There is a continuing budget for proms in the park, which is £14,000 per year. Of course, that is subject to continuing budget support by council, so there's no guarantee of that money in the future.
So that we're just going to continue to support it for this current year on that. So we could be doing this again next year.
So there's three options that we've set out in the report on page 34. So we can continue with the current arrangements, which means the council would have to continue to fund the proms in the park to the tune of £14,000 a year, or we could completely cancel the event and make a saving of £14,000, or we could go with option 3, which is the officer's recommendation, which is to support proms in the park but to look for alternative funding models. So what we're proposing is that we reduce the cost to the council over 3 years by introducing ticketing charges, looking for sponsorship, maybe more paid-for concessions on the site, and seeking potential other sources of funding from other organisations such as the Arts Council. So there are the three options that have been set out in the report.
Yeah, because on the main page, on the report, it just says number 1, to continue supporting, but we could consider these other options or anything we think we should be deciding on. Because obviously there is, obviously, hopefully, some sort of sponsorship could come in and things like that. So this is not a service level agreement we're agreeing to or anything.
No, the options are set out on page 34. We're saying there are three options, as I just described. So at the moment, in the contract with Parkwood Leisure for the Hazlitt Theatre, they are obliged to support the delivery of Proms in the Park, which they do. But we still have to contribute £14,000 in cash plus staff time to make that happen. So the option that we're recommending is option 3.3, which is to continue to support it but withdraw the funding over 3 years by looking for a different funding model.
Councillor Ells.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really following on from Councillor Nagy there, I notice under the available options, it says look for alternative methods of funding to reduce the subsidy over the next 3 years and move towards a cost-neutral position, which is fine. It says this could include making it a ticketed event. On the actual recommendation, it says look for alternative funding and introduce ticketing. I just wondered if we could clarify that a bit, please.
Sorry, I hadn't picked up on that. You're right, they are slightly different. I think that introducing ticketing prices for tickets is absolutely essential to reduce the subsidy. I think it would be very, very unlikely that we would be able to cover the whole cost of the event through other sources, and an introduction of a ticket charge really is quite essential if we're not going to completely subsidise it as a council.
Councillor Wilson.
I've got a couple of questions first, and one might sound silly, but I do want an answer to it. How do you define children? In other words, in here, you're talking about children being free, I think, because it talks about cost tickets for adults, but you can, you know, when you go to places, you sometimes get it free up to 7. And I want to know how we're defining children. Is that, you know, is that to 18, or what is it, so that we have an... Thank you. And the other thing is, I don't see anything in here that will give me a true idea of what the cost will be to us. For instance, when we talk about going out to seek outside funding, I presume from the way it's written that we haven't done that in the past, or have we? I mean, what effort have we put into seeing if we can get a sponsor or anything before? Because if we haven't done it, what I want to know is what it will cost us in terms of resources to have a person in place for how long to actually do that sort of work. And I can't really think of this in isolation, because if we're going to run events successfully, then it may well be that we need to have more expertise, and there's a cost attached to that, in actually having an appropriate post or going outside to do it, to actually say, all right, how much effort do we put into raising money for the culture of this borough? And I keep banging on about this, I have to say, that it would be, I truly believe that it's high time we actually had a post or a method, I won't necessarily say a new post, but to actually go out there to do the scanning of everything, all the money that, because even in these straitened times, there is money out there for certain things, and I don't think we do it to the extent that we should. So if we were going to say we want to look for sponsors for this, well, yes, okay, but how do we fit that into the overall work pattern, and what is the cost attached to that? if we're going to say we should ticket an event, fine. So let's say we put a ticket at, let's say at £5. How much of that £5 will offset the cost of the event, and how much of that £5 will have to go in administration to actually sell the tickets and produce them and send them out? So I just feel that to make a decision, you need to have a better idea of actually what it's going to cost you to do things, and what the profit from what it what's the cost and what's the profit. So how do you know where to pitch a ticket if you agree that you wish to do it? Because if we say, well, we only want to charge £5, we know that doesn't cover the whole thing, but it will help defray the cost up to a point. But the £5 might not be what you're actually getting to defray the cost. It might only be £3. So I don't want to keep delaying the decisions of this committee, but I really, really don't think I can sort of say, yeah, okay, let's charge for it and let's make it a £5, or let's charge for it and let's make it a £10, or actually I think it's an absolute waste of time because it's going to cost us so much. Yes, let's get somebody in who can not just raise money for this, but could spend their time raising money for a lot of other things as you hear what I'm saying. So
I can come back on a number of those issues, and I'll ask Laura to chip in as well, I'm sure. So on the ticket sales, we know exactly how much that will cost because we did it through the Hazlitt Theatre box office for the cinema event. And basically, they have a booking fee, which is normal practice on a ticketing event, and then we get charged 10% of the ticket. It's negotiable, but 10% maximum, so we'll know exactly how much we'll get from the tickets. The proposal here is that we reduce the subsidy over 3 years so we can develop that new business model. We're not saying from year one we will cover the costs completely. We're saying we'll introduce things gradually. The £5 ticket charge was a result of the feedback from the consultation we did with the people who attended on the day. So we've got that. In terms of expertise, Laura has become an absolute expert on events. She's really up to her knowledge in that area and has attended quite a lot of training courses and seminars and is actually our events expert in the council now as part of the Maidstone Culture and Leisure team. On terms, there was another point you made. I was trying to remember what it was. On sponsorship, we have actually adopted in the team, and this committee adopted it, a sponsorship and fundraising strategy. So we have expertise in the team to do that, and we've already been really successful in raising sponsorship for the Lego exhibition, the Coming Home exhibition at the museum. So we've got experience in doing that, and we know how to approach it and how to set up the package that will attract the sponsors.
If I may, I am not saying we don't have the expertise. What I am saying is, against the background of everything else you already do, have we got the expertise and the resources to actually do it? Because I am given to understand that our officers are working 100% now. If they aren't, then we don't need them, if I can put it that way, or there's the flexibility to add something else in. But if you are already working to the 100% capacity, you may well have the expertise, but you will not have the time, and something else has to give. And really, those are the questions that I think we need to have a good understanding of.
I think there's some short-term pain for the longer gain. And so what we're proposing with the POMs over 3 years wouldn't actually cause that much more work than we have now in delivering it. We're just going to change the delivery model. So the amount of time that officers need to put into this, probably the extra time would be around seeking additional funding and bidding to people for funds. But we would do that at the beginning. We'd have to put extra resource into that and divert away from something else. But it's the only way to get the business model changed. And I would hope that we would be able to manage that in year one from existing resources by by diverting some attention onto this while we get this new business model up and running. But your point about the wider issues of doing this for other things, that would be an issue. So if people, talk about doing more events, and we absolutely have not got capacity to start building anything brand new from scratch, and that would need additional resource.
Thank you very much. From the chair, I have a concern about ticketing for proms in the park, to be honest. I take the point we had it for the Disney film, which was the first, and that worked. But the proms in the park's always been free. And from the point of the ratepayers and residents, it's a the council does something, and we go, and they go because they want to enjoy the music. Same with the Mellor. So I'm a little concerned about looking at ticketing at the moment. I could be persuaded otherwise, but I think it's a slippery slope. And I know we've had a finance meeting already today, and we are looking at cuts, but I think we still should retain an offer for the residents. So I'd like to find another way, apart from going for alternative funding, a way of... Sorry, yeah, thank you. Councillor...
Thank you, Chairman. I understand where Councillor Wilson's coming from, I really do. I have a slightly different take on this, actually. I think this is something that's been a great success. And the first line of the recommendation is to continue to support. And I actually think, in principle, we must do this, because if we don't support something like this, then we're a heritage, culture and leisure committee, and this is very much part of attracting people to the town, providing a service to residents of the town, and it is, I think Councillor Daly said it, it's a high culture. It's we have a magnificent symphony orchestra, we have a lot of support, so I just feel that that's a given that we support it. I know I'm saying this without figures in front of me, but I actually think this is something we must do. Now, I did write down on this, I thought, on the ticketing issue, and I thought, no to ticketing. But then I hear what the officers are saying, that in practice they've actually carried out a successful ticketing of an event in Watland Park. And if that is the case, then I'm willing to say that should be tried. I think this is really about the funding, isn't it? It's more, to me, it's a given that we should do this, but it's about the funding and how we take it forward. And I played around with the wording. I was listening to what was being said. And the wording as it's currently set out, it is very specific, isn't it? And introduce ticketing. I think Councillor L picked this point up very well earlier on. And I was slightly changed that wording, actually, to something like a little bit softer. Not say something like, look for alternative funding. Actually, that covers everything, including the possibility of introducing ticketing. So it's a slightly softer way of putting it, and it gives you the opportunity to explore that and use the current processes that you've used before. So I would be happy to support that, because I do think this is a very, very important facility that we provide. Thank you, Chairman.
What we've actually had is a proposal that it should be it should be worked on over a 4-year period, or over a period. So I'm going to take a slightly different tack, Councillor Perry, which the officers may hold up their hands in horror, but I believe then that we should delay introducing ticketing for 12 months, for a year, and do all we can to find the sponsorship and see how easy or not it is to do. And as we're looking at it over a longer period, then we should I'm going to say we may well have to bite the bullet in 12 months' time and introduce ticketing. But I would like to see if we can find other ways of doing it at this point in time. And I don't think it's going to seriously affect the finances of this committee for 12 months, is it? No. So I am proposing that we accept that we need to work really hard to find other forms of funding and sponsorship and see if there are other ways of doing it, and delay a decision on introducing ticketing for till the next budget period.
I think that's an absolutely excellent suggestion, because we were going to reduce the funding incrementally anyway, and if we concentrate this year on finding sponsors and additional funding, then we'll see how successful that can be, and then we can report back again after this year's event, 2017 event, on whether or not that's been successful and the future sustainability. So I think that's a very good suggestion.
Councillor Perry.
I'd just like to second Councillor Wilson's proposal. It's a pragmatic way of going forward. And I think we're talking from the same hymn sheet on this one. Yeah.
Are you seconding Councillor Wilson's proposal? Thank you, committee. We'll move to a vote on that. On the amended...
Yeah, okay, so I shall read it.
Just read that out. Thank you.
So the amended wording for the recommendation is to continue to support proms in the park, but look for alternative funding to reduce the cost to Maidstone Borough Council over the next 3 years. I'll just leave it to that.
That's a given, but we actually need to say to delay a decision on ticketing until the next budget period. Hopefully we'll be able to say, no, we don't have to do it at all, but we do have to be pragmatic, sadly. So that does need to be there, and then that covers what you've put in the papers, because we do have to answer what's in the papers.
Yeah, just like to read that out once more time for everybody's benefit. Thank you.
So I hope I've got it right. To continue to support proms in the park, but look for alternative funding to reduce the cost to Maidstone Borough Council and delay the introduction of ticket charges. Sorry, delay the decision on the introduction of ticketing charges for 1 year.
Right, is that agreed, committee? Right, can we put that to the vote? All those in favour of this amendment? That's unanimous. Any? No abstentions. That's unanimous. Thank you, members. Move on to item 2, the multicultural event food festival outsourced to an external provider with a reducing subsidy over 3 years. It becomes self-financing. Can we debate that one now, members? Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, sorry, the Mellor. I wasn't trying to cloak it. But... Yes. Yeah. Sorry, Mrs. Hudd is going to reintroduce this so we're all fresh on it.
As this has been such a long item, I just wanted to bring members' attention back to the 3 options that we were suggesting for the future of the Mellor, which are on page 34, items 3.4 to 3.6. So the 3 options that we're putting forward for the future of the Mellor Festival are that 1, no longer fund or support the Maidstone Mellor or a multicultural festival. 2 would be to reduce the size of the Mellor and outsource the event management to fit the current budget, continuing to work with partners to deliver the event. This would be dependent on Arts Council funding and income through stalls and require MBC funding in full. Or option 3, which is the officer's recommended option, is to develop a new 2 to 3 day multicultural event and food festival, outsourcing the event and reducing the subsidy over 3 years until it becomes firstly self-financing and then potentially profitable.
you've again got a discrepancy between the page 34 and the recommendation, which doesn't refer to 2 or 3 day event. So page 34, the wording is different than on page 24.
Sorry, just bear with us. We're just checking the papers.
On page 24, it just says a new multicultural event and food festival. And when you actually go to page 34, it actually refers to the 2 to 3 days multicultural event and food festival, which is omitted from the recommendation on page 24. I have no particular preference for each wording, but it is actually different. So I thought I ought to point that out.
Mr. Chairman, it's quite true. We have 3 options in front of us. One is recommended, and the wording should be identical from for the page 34. The one that is recommended from page 34, that precise wording should be on the recommendation at the front.
You're just amending that, members. 3.6 is the new recommended option for item 2 on the Mellor. Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually like this recommendation on 3.6. I think to have a 2 to 3 day multicultural event will give us a lot more scope to do things. It will encourage more people to come, more things to be able to, to get done. And it would probably go round a lot of other events in Maidstone. So I would like to propose that we actually go with the recommendation 3 on page 35, 3.6.
Do you have a seconder?
Thank you.
We can discuss, but I'm going to say, if anybody, sorry, Councillor Alves, would like to.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wondered, I also agree with 3.6. I think that's very good as a recommendation. But should we not then say we're just copying that into number 2 on page 24, so we're actually voting on the same wording before we vote on it? Yeah? Yeah, thank you.
That's what we would do, yeah. 3.6 is now transferred to page 24. Number 2. No, you're quite right. Just, I'm sure. Good of you to check, because we don't want to miss anything. Sorry. Councillor Nagy.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit concerned about this because, obviously, as we've heard, and a lot of people in Maidstone know, we already have a very good Mellor. So I'm surprised to see we're developing a new 3-day event, multicultural event. I would just like to see the current Mellor, as we have it, back in Moat Park, and keep the same organising thing, but keep it over 3 days. I think that would make more of an event. So, but then we're doing away with what we got at the moment, and then we've got to get someone else in to try and organise it over 3 years. And are we going to have a service level agreement on this? Is that one for this one? I got confused with number 2 because that said it, over 3 years, so it becomes self-financing. So are we offering someone, a new group of people, or whoever takes it on, a subsidy or service level agreement? Could someone just clear that up for me?
Okay, so the Mellor, as it was in 2015, we couldn't deliver that again because the budget doesn't cover it. We were already spending more than we had budget for, so we can't just redo that festival. Also, from the consultation that we've done and the people that we've spoken to, it needs refreshing. and everybody agrees with that. That's sort of been unanimous. What we would do if committee approves 3.6 recommendation tonight is we will commission the festival out. So we will advertise it as an opportunity to the market, and we will get bids back from people to run it, and there will be a full contract for them to do that, which will include a reducing subsidy from the council over the 3 years with a potential profit share if they hit a certain level. So that would all be sorted out contractually.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So there is money available. If we decide on 3.6, money will be found over 3 years. Can I ask how much that might be, or has that not been decided yet?
Yeah, the budget for the MELA is in the report. It's currently between the funding that is raised through Arts Council by Cohesion Plus and the income through stalls at 15,500 per year that NBC pick up. However, as Don pointed out, the actual cost to NBC was substantially more than that in 2015.
So the idea is then that we get less and less involved in events and festivals. We just ask someone to run something and hopefully make some money out of whatever they're doing.
It's a tested formula. If I can give an example to committee that might explain how this works. For example, when I was in Canterbury, we had a food and drink festival that was costing the council over £40,000 a year to run. Even though they made a lot of income, the net cost was still £40,000. We used exactly the same model. We commissioned it out on a 3-year contract with a reducing subsidy, and that event has grown. The commercial provider who are running it has brought a lot of extra things into it, more entertainment, more stages, more children's activity, and they've moved it into a profit-making business, and the council now gets a return back from it rather than having to subsidise it, and the event is grown and is better.
One more thing, Chairman, if I may. So where will we be offering the event to these new people? Will it be in High Street or Moat Park? Or hasn't not that been decided yet?
Well, overwhelmingly from the consultation, people said they wanted to see the event back in Moat Park. So that's to do a 2 to 3 day event of this nature. It would have to be in Moat Park. It wouldn't be possible to do it anywhere else.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
First, I'm going to apologise. Now it's on. First, I'm going to apologise to Councillor Hinder because I know she'd like to get away, as would I, because my first appointment tomorrow morning is 8:30. However, I want to give a little bit of background to this and say why I can see 2 ways forward, if I can put it that way. When the Chief Executive and Mrs Hudd came to the leaders to explain the issue about the difficulty of the MELA, on 2 counts, if I've understood it correctly. One was undeniably the fact that it was expensive and we couldn't afford it, and the other was that it had in recent years somewhat lost its way. And I think it was Councillor Mackay, who is no longer with us now, who suggested an alternative for this year to give us all time to consider about what the way forward was to embody the spirit of what we'd been trying to do when the MELA was first introduced. In other words, it needed to be refreshed or something different put in its place. And we thought it would be an utter disaster if it was just chopped while we thought. We needed something. So that's why it went ahead the way it did this year. What's concerned me a little bit is that instead of actually going back to the reason we had the MELA in the first place, which was how do we engender and how do we get a better understanding of the various cultures and groups of communities we have in Maidstone and celebrate that diversity. How do we do that and draw people together? And is the MELA still the right way to do it? And I'm very disappointed, actually, that we seem stuck in a Mellor trap. I'm not saying it isn't the way forward, just that we don't seem to have been able to get out of side of that box. And I'm not going to say this is what I'm promoting. I'm not necessarily, but you could say, wouldn't it be better to try and, especially as we're trying to get more things happening, wouldn't it be better to celebrate Chinese New Year, to celebrate Diwali, to celebrate St George's Day? Would that be a oh, heaven help us, even have a maypole on May Day in the town centre? There are various ways of celebrating diversity which could actually be better for that point of view. So you can go down that route, and I don't think we've even discussed or thought about that sort of thing. On the other hand, I can see the point in having an event in Moat Park, perhaps a food, whatever it was Mrs. Hudd said about food and drink, which would include sort of all these wonderful multicultural things. But actually there's two rather different things that we're talking about. So I have no problem in voting with you to develop an event, but I don't think it should be badged as so that we can celebrate our diversity. Because I don't think if your main function is to get something that is going to be self-funding and then potentially profitable, that your actual view of what you are doing is to celebrate diversity. It is to have a festival that may be culturally diverse, but its main function is not to do what we're worried about, which is drawing our various groups together. And I'm really concerned that since the leaders suggested that we should actually have something slightly different while we could discuss these other things, that those discussions have just not taken place, and we've just gone down Mellor Road. So, as I say, I can happily support this developing a multicultural food festival, or whatever we decide it should be, so that it's another thing that might go into the melting pot. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, in actual fact, our society in Maidstone has become even more culturally diverse. We've done nothing, as far as I'm aware, to actually capture the new people that we have here. And so I am expressing genuine concern that we're muddling two things together, and we shouldn't do it. Now, I think it could come together, but it's just that we haven't had that conversation.
Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually think what Francis is quite good. My vision of that was exactly what you said. I mean, we have got a lot of different nationalities here now. And wouldn't it be lovely if we're all contacted to a view to achieving exactly what you're saying? And that was what I thought, that, the 2 to 3 a day event would probably be. I mean, there's lots of different cultures, there's dancing, there's singing, there's all sorts of things that could go on in the park, and which would be a great place to have that, and to have different, I mean, I can just imagine the different costumes that would probably be there. So that was the vision that I sort of saw out of this, and I don't know whether you felt the same thing, but that's how I saw it.
I'm not going to go against you today. Because this is develop, and develop means it's going to come back to us, hopefully, and we're going to have some information about how it would be developed. I just really wonder if you outsource. These are no better than the old ones we have. If you outsource something, how much you'll get that very close local involvement. Again, I'm not saying you can't get it, you can. So I'm happy to support you, but I actually want to know rather more about the brief that's given to people, how it's put together. Do you see what I'm saying? And also about, in fact, when it would be, because it might be that we want to have it set the same weekend that we have our mayor making and everything to turn it into a big, you know, civic, no, I hate the word civic, but a big celebration so that we really make something of a weekend for this town and the park. So yes, I'm going to support this for you, but I just want to flag up what I'm saying.
Can I just make a point on that? I think if we're going to have a multicultural festival of some description in 2017, a decision needs to be made tonight because we need to get the ball rolling. We can't leave it any longer. So could I suggest that if committee is minded to go with the recommendation that it's been made, that we put an additional item in there that the brief that goes out to commission it is agreed in consultation with the chair or a small group, because we'll need to get that out in the next month and to have any chance of delivering a festival next year on this basis.
Yeah, from the chair, can I just agree with that? I think I agree with Councillor Wilson's comments about the wider sphere of the culture in Maidstone and what we're trying to achieve. And obviously we haven't done enough homework on that yet. But I think the time, you know, I think we've made progress suggesting 3.6 and it goes back to Moat Park, which is what we wanted, or at least a lot of the residents in the survey wanted. But I think, yeah, we need to do a bit more homework to see exactly how we develop and what other add-ons we do, because obviously there's other dates, as Councillor Wilson suggested, in the year that need to be celebrated. Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm delaying this, I know, I'm sorry. Can I suggest that this is looked at in quite much more depth and then brought back, or have a working group or somebody that works with Dawn to actually develop and find out where we're going to go, but in principle then we go with, you know, with a recommendation.
3.6 and then come back to it.
We can't go back to committee, otherwise we won't have an event next year.
No,
We won't
okay.
have enough time. We won't have enough time to commission it out.
I do have some trust in people, you know. I think that I hear what you say. If we're going to have anything next year, we've got to move quickly. So I'm happy to go. I've said what I mean, and you know, you've got to say what you're concerned about. But I'm happy to go. You know, to go with this recommendation, provided there's some surety that the things we've said we're concerned about, how do the local communities get involved with it? It's not just some organisation sort of bringing in and saying, this is what we do and you lump it, if I can put it that way. I'm happy to go with that and accept that it should be in consultation with the chairman. Chairman and vice chairman, I should say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Okay, unless there's anybody else wishing to speak on this, we will go to the vote on your recommendation and seconded by Councillor Wilson. 3.6 then, members, I don't need to read it again, hopefully. Can we vote on that? Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 in favour? Against? Abstention? Oh, sorry. And it's been a long day, sorry. Councillor, you're abstaining. Thank you. So that was 7 in favour, no objections and 1 abstention on that one. Thank you very much. Right, we'll now discuss item 3, the... Oh, sorry, leave. Okay, item 3, members, to approve the amendments to the festivals and events policy relating to the noise levels and frequency of events, and then mostly on, it's not here with the Rambling Man, but that's the recommendation. Right, we've a lot of debate on this, and obviously we have the technical officer here with us tonight if we want to talk about levels of noise, etc. So there'll be some information there. Can I take Councillor Largy?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask, like the Rambling Man, we did have our own sound person there, or we've got sound equipment that they can leave and monitor. That was taking place, wasn't it?
Good evening. To introduce myself, then I'm Martin Jeans. I'm the Environmental Enforcement Manager for Maidstone Borough Council. My team's responsible for monitoring noise, both from an event and licensing point of view, but also from a statutory nuisance, so neighbour noise, more traditional noise and events. And the simple answer to the question is yes, we were monitoring. We had an officer on the ground on the Sunday, but because of the number of events that run, not just our own events, but events that are run across the borough, at the different venues that host events and temporary events as well. We invested some time ago in a noise monitoring kit, which is a standalone piece of equipment that sits in a secure location and monitors the noise on our behalf. The officers can log in via a laptop to see what things are going on, but specifically it's designed to pick up when noise levels over a 15-minute period are breached. So it will record that to check that that's not just someone screaming down the microphone because they found the kit. It actually records what was the noise responsible for that breach, if you like.
I just mentioned that because people were querying tonight that Maidstone Borough Council wasn't independently monitoring, but we do, don't we?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Again, it's a question. Yes, it's a question. There's wording in here that talks about the festival and events season. Can I ask what the festival and events season is, please?
That's really the period between sort of May and the end of September. It's really to do with the events that can be held outdoors. And it's unlikely that outdoor events, especially of a large nature, of a large festival, be held outside of those months.
So can I come back then and then say, so are we set, because we said that some of the paper talks about being able to spread them out, you know, so that we get a balance. But if you're talking about things going in, because they're outdoors in a season, then you're talking about May, 4 months, 4 months, and that you get 8, 9, 10, 11 events in 4 months, which are all at the weekend. And so I think that we do have to be careful about what we have in those months. Now, I actually am not going to say we shouldn't have the Rambling Man, because I believe it is an event that we should have. I agree with Councillor English that we've had events in Moat Park long before it was Moat Park, in actual fact. But I'm very well aware that we got lots of complaints in High Street Ward when the speakers returned one way. Our residents, bless them, have not complained recently because the speakers have been turned the other way. And I am not Councillor Ravel, but I live in High Street Ward and I live a significant distance away from Moat Park. And there have been weekends when it has driven us crackers because of that deep sound. However, I take the view that it is perfectly acceptable for me to be driven crackers on perhaps a couple of weekends in a period. I do not think it's acceptable to be sent crackers with it over and over again. And what we've got to remember is noise. I'm sorry, I know that I am not the expert on this. However, we did a scrutiny on the effect of the motorway on Maidstone many years ago, during which I learnt a hell of a lot about how noise travels. And so I know that there's really little point in measuring what the noise is like a metre or how many metres away from the centre, because noise can do really funny things. And it may be that you need to actually have it monitored in Bearsted, or where I live at the distance. You know, it's really a strange animal. I think I'm a little bit concerned about what we're about saying we will only have one event in Watmans but up to 3 in Moat Park, when the density of population round Moat Park is intense. It's one of the most densely populated areas in the entire borough. So I don't think we should not have the Rambling Man. I do query having up to 3 events of that sort of level and up to 8 of a level that also can give severe problems. And I come to you, Mr. James, because I really have this issue of how we can actually realistically monitor this so that we know what it's sounding like in different places, how we do that. Because to say the level's fine here, we've said it ourselves, you can be under the speakers and having a wonderful time, but you can be sort of a couple of miles away and it's really unbearable. Councillor English and I both remember the nightclub down the road from us, and the issues it produced. So we do need events. I don't want to close them down. I want us to be open, to having lots of things in Moat Park, but I really do think in this densely populated area, up to 3 events at that level is, in that time frame, is a little bit intense and too much.
A number of the events that we already have come under that banner. So, for example, the Big Day Out and Rambling Man are 2 events out of those 3. It could be that the Multicultural Festival would end up being the 3rd one. However, that's one of the reasons why we've introduced this Category B, where we can actually reduce the noise of some events, and probably a Multicultural Festival would come in with a lower band because it has a lower level. Giving us the opportunity to have a maximum of 3 events or 6 days in the year doesn't mean to say that they will actually be taken up. It does give us the opportunity, should something extraordinary come along, like a Radio 1 Big Weekend, like the Torch Celebration event, like a Tour de France set-off, to have that addition. One of the things that we have to consider about events in Moat Park as well is that the calendar is already fairly full with events on most weekends between May and September. There are very few gaps in the calendar for a larger event, and a larger event doesn't take up just the weekend it takes place. It can take 3 weeks of a build, and currently there isn't a gap in the Moat Park calendar for another event. But the policy is about leaving that opportunity in there should it be required in the future.
I was leader of the council when we had the big weekend. I knew about it a significant number of months before any other councillor did. I know it was the cabinet system then, but I had to give my permission to say, yes, we'll do all the work that goes with it. I would submit that there's another way round that, and if something like that crops up, then you get permission to actually do the extra event. But to have it as a norm, I'm not very happy with. I just feel that we decided as a council to put residential retirement flats in that property before we actually decided to have events. And that's a mistake, a happenstance, whatever you want to call it. But they are elderly, retired people. And I'm trying to create this balance that I just feel that if we can keep most things to this lower level, that's fine. It'll still not be liked, but it's fine. But I think to just say in that very short time frame to have all that, sort of like 3 big events is just too much crammed in there. But that isn't to say that we can't have a get out if we got another big weekend or a Tour de France or something like it.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally agree, actually, with what Councillor Wilson has said, actually. And there's a danger here, of course, that when you see number of events, 11, and then you think, oh, that's not very many. But actually, over a season, and I think you're absolutely right to mention it, it could be 2 every fortnight, you have an event. So it can. And we've had this back in my own ward, actually, with the motorcycling events, where the same issues are coming up. And you worked it out, it was only over a season, and then you worked it out, actually it was every other weekend, people getting a lot of noise. This is not Glastonbury either, by the way. It's in an urban environment, but that worries me as well. And we've gone for 65 decibels. That's the max. Is that the max? And that's what I don't particularly like, because I think 1 or 2 people, objectors, said, look, why don't you make it 55? Because it seems to me that it's still a hell of a lot of noise, and if you have to put up with this thump, 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 it is pretty depressing, and I know a lot of people get very fed up with it. We have to be proportional, and I agree that these events, I'm not against Rambling Man either. It brings in a lot of money to the borough, it's very important, but we have to look for a pragmatic solution to this. And I actually think the guidelines for Moat Park of 65 decibels is too high, and I think we should make it 55, which is what I think was suggested from the floor. And I think that would be would make...
Mr. Jeans, would you like...
Or at least do something with the sound systems to make it more practical. But I entirely agree with what Councillor Wilson said. I think we do need to watch this very carefully. It's something that does worry me a bit. Thank you.
Fully understand, Mr. Perry. Mr. Jeans, would you like to comment on that, to give us some technical advice?
Yeah. I think it's important to understand that noise isn't calculated in units. It's logarithmic. So you're talking about a 10 decibel difference, but actually 10 decibels is a halving of the sound level. So you're talking about half as loud as it was. So the reason that it's set at that level is because at the stage, they're operating in around about 95 to 105 decibels at the front of the stage. That's at that level in order to maintain the level of enjoyment for the audience. It's done for safety, because if you have a large crowd and the volume isn't loud enough, those at the back will push forward, and you then have a crushing incident at the front. So something that we had with we've spoken about a few times already, the Radio 1 festival, a Radio 1 event. They had a higher limit actually because of the orientation of the stage, and they pushed it quite hard a number of times because the number of in the audience that was listening to that on the outdoor stage was getting larger and larger, and the people at the front were coming under pressure because people were moving in to here. So we had a battle with the sound engineer on the day about how high was high enough in order for him to stop people at the front being hurt, maintaining a level of enjoyment for the whole audience, but also not interfering with the residents around. I mean, and obviously 75 decibels, which was what the limit was for that event, is twice as loud as 65 decibels. So you can appreciate that all of a sudden you're talking about quite significant amounts of difference when you're talking about the difference between 10 decibels and 10, for want of a better description. You also, in order for people to notice a sound level change, you need around that sort of level anyway. If it's anything sort of, the official factor is a factor of 3 decibels is a noticeable change in sound, but for the human ear to pick it up, you'll be anywhere between 5 and 10 decibels before the human ear will actually listen to that. And Councillor Revel mentioned earlier about why people weren't interacting and saying about the fact that there was, we would have automatically seen these breaches in the noise level, but those breaches were over a 15-minute period. So there was a period at the beginning of, I think it was the Whitesnake set, where the sound engineer set a level that he thought was appropriate for his band, and there was some intense negotiations for a couple of minutes in order to bring that level back down. I think that's a fair way of putting it. And not with us, that was actually the event organiser, because we didn't actually find out they breached until the day after when we reviewed the equipment. But that was enough, that sort of 2 or 3 minutes of them being up too loud was enough to send them 3 decibels over. But 3 decibels it's not something that you would naturally hear in a 15-minute average, but you would have heard for the 2 minutes at the beginning. And I totally sympathise with members, because there's a technical aspect to noise, and there's a very emotive issue with noise, and the type of music very much dictates the type of noise. We've had lots of talk about thump, 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 which is the thump, thump, thump you'll get with all types of music. It doesn't matter if it's classical or drum and bass and garage, as Councillor English mentioned, or if you're talking about rock music. They all have a low-frequency signature. How big a signature that is depends on the type of music. And because you're then looking at the hardest aspect of noise to control, the 65 decibel limit that we set is actually around the sort of the higher end, the sort of what human ear naturally hears. The thump, 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 you actually feel rather than hear, and your body interprets it as sound, but because it's such a low frequency, and that's why it causes so much complaint. And we've purposely not put in the limits for low frequency noise, because we know there's work being done on that at the moment that we can work on in order to set better levels independently with each event. And you know, topography and climate have also been mentioned. They're very important, and we've had assurances from Rambling Man that they will look at the orientation of the stage. There are logistical concerns we have with that, because we have to have the right facilities in place in the park, and hosting these events does come as a cost to the park itself, because if they're in the wrong location or if they're not managed properly, then there's restoration work that has to be done. There's safety aspects. How close do you get your audience to a lake, for want of a better example? So there's lots of considerations that have to be done, and Audley House and Moat House is a logistical problem for us, because it does narrow our options in terms of it is a property that's now closer than any of the other properties, but it's still at the longest distance, so there is work to be done there.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry.
From the event organiser's point of view, if we didn't have a limit at 65 for Rambling Man, we wouldn't have the event anymore. And one of the reasons that the Social Festival wanted to move was because actually their audience would complain that it was too quiet for the actual audience that was there. Other events such that are held in Clapham Common, Hackney Marshes and various other places have actually increased their noise level limits. Now, they have a different environment to Moat Park, so they're not comparable, and we're not in the least bit suggesting that we should increase them. But in many cases, the limit that's been set at the nearest residence for those places is 75, and in some cases 85 now as well. So we're actually at the lower end of the spectrum. But I don't think for the larger events we would be able to go any lower. That in mind, where we've classed Category A events for as such the Big Day Out, they'll never reach that level. That's never going to be an issue for that event. It's a maximum level. It doesn't mean to say that everything's going to be pitched at the top end of the scale with a chance of actually breaching it. It's that gap between above the background noise levels where we're saying that there's a category and the very maximum that we would accept.
Thank you very much. I had Councillor Earls next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is actually nothing to do with noise levels, but just following on from Councillor Mrs Wilson, she was saying it says up to 3 events, and I believe Laura answered that was something that we could possibly do, not necessarily would. Well, on page 33, the current wording for the large music events, it says it's limited to 8 days a year, so I know we're cutting down on that, but it also says a maximum of 3 consecutive days for any one event. In the new wording, there isn't any mention of a limit on consecutive days. I know we're not heading for a 6-day rambling man, but looking on the fact that we're talking about what we may do in the future, I wondered if we ought to be looking at just putting that 3 consecutive days back in. Thank you.
Three consecutive days would probably be considered the maximum, especially from licensing anyway. So yeah, we could add that in.
I do apologise. Well, I think all three of us have just got to go. We've got issues at home and various things, and I do apologise, but I'll go with the flow on this one. I'm sorry, Chairman, but I do apologise. But
there's not a difference in the recommendation. We just haven't included that 3 consecutive days in the new wording. If councillors want to put that 3 consecutive days point back in, we can add it back in. It's not an inconsistency. We hadn't included it because we didn't think it was necessary, because, as Laura has said, 3 days is the maximum that would be allowed by licensing anyway.
The wording inside, which actually I think I probably could go with, actually says that it will be limited, wait a minute, let me get the right bit, that it will be limited to 3 events per year, a maximum of 2 consecutive days, and no more than 5 days in the year. Well, I think that's better for this one, actually.
Sorry, it's just part of the thing. It's just an indication of what we would accept, what we would have as acceptable. But Proms in the Park, for example, wouldn't even be classed as a Category A event for Watman Park.
Councillor Nuggie, you want to
Yeah,
come back?
Chairman, can we really vote on this as we're the only ones left?
Apparently we can.
We can?
We're still quorate.
We're still quorate, thank you. Yeah. It's a bit unbalanced, but we still are.
So can we agree that we have no desire to reduce that decibel level for all the reasons that have been given? That I know that for a fact, that what we've been told, you can't really muck around with that. I'm happy personally. Personally, I'm happy with that. I do have a problem with actually having in black and white this number. Either, if you want to keep it to 3 events, then I feel that in a way we need to reduce the maximum number of days, or find some way to just find some way to do something so that residents all round that park, understand that we're listening to what they've said. Because, sorry? Yes. Okay. So that's a more flexible way of doing it.
Can you just
Well,
repeat that
what you've got at the moment is at the A grade, you've got up to 3 days and a maximum of 6 days a year. Yes? So if you said up to 3 events, but a maximum of 4 days, that would allow you to have 3 events, 1 of 2 days and 2 of 1 day each. It would give you flexibility, but it would actually show that you appreciate that we're in the middle of the most densely populated area in Maidstone. It is the most densely populated area in Maidstone. And as it's here at the moment, if you actually add up your festival season and you add A and B together, you are talking about an event every single weekend with music. Over a 5 month, over a 4 month. So you know, what I'm trying to say is I don't want to close down being able to have events, but I do think that this borough should take note that we are in the most densely populated area in Maidstone. And however you cut it, however you put the speakers, it's going to be difficult for residents if we don't have some common sense about how we agree and approve these things. For instance, I like what you say about spreading things out. So you could, you know, you could say, well, we won't have 2 of these events within this close together, or, you know. And I think if you're looking at a festival period, you're limiting anyway what we can do anyway. You just can't fit them all in anyway, I don't think. I'm sorry, you know that I try to be accommodating and find a way forward with things, but I actually represent a lot of these people, and I just think that we have to bear in mind that all the houses were there first, not Moat House, but all the other houses were there first, and I pointed this out when we first started to talk about this.
So we're just analysing that, just to see.
Can I just make a comment? We're just discussing it. I mean, I think it'd be more practical to reduce it to 2 events and leave the days at 6, because something like the Rambling Man, they are doing sound checks, etc. on the Friday, so they are making a noise, and I think we'd cause ourselves a lot of problems with complaints. Or we're going to say that we wouldn't include that. I think if we go down to 2 events over 5 days, then we've got no... So 2 events over 6 days. Then we're at capacity, so we would have to come back to committee for any new event that came to us.
Okay, then I'll propose that is what we do, and say, and just add the proviso that if something comes along that is unusual, like the big weekend, then clearly you come to the committee and just, or to the chairman if it's got to be kept confidential, and because I know that can happen, and say we have a unique opportunity. I don't think any committee would actually refuse a unique opportunity, but if the norm is 2, so I'm going to recommend then that it goes to 2 with the 6 days. Are you happy with that, members?
Sorry, Councillor Nagy, do you want to...
Yeah, I just like to come, because obviously I've lived in Moat Avenue, and in the past when I've complained about noise, and I've said this before, I've always been told, Dave, you live near Moat Park. What do you expect, Dave? And the other thing is, where they turn the speakers around, I couldn't hear any noise until I got to Moat Park gates. And when they turned the stage around, that's the first thing, I've said this before, licensing and stuff. I thought, well, what have they done different? And they turned the stage the other way slightly. And obviously, us residents don't suffer that noise, because us residents living on this side of Moat Park, on the approach, also suffer every setting up time. And, the Rambling Man sets up at maybe nearly 2 weeks before, and you get all the heavies. So we all have that. But in the past, when this has come up, Dave, you live near Moat, and all the other residents, we live near Moat Park, and that's part of living by Moat Park, because we live near lovely Moat Park. Because the things have just been turned around, residents of Grove Green and Bearsted just suffer a bit of noise. So as for Rambling Man, I think it's one of the best events, especially this year, was one of the best events run, because I never suffered any traffic, nothing at all. The social was different because they had to stay in and it was penned in all day. So when they got out about 10:30, it was just a noise and a riot. And the main event, I think, causes, as for me, is the race for life, because you can't get in and out of Moat Park or Maidstone all day. So what we're talking about here mainly is because noise would turn the speaker slightly. But I'm sure the Rambling Man, because I had a free ticket which was offered to me by the chairman, and I think they will try and do the best they can for the sound these days. So I would like to see Rambling Man go on this day, and I'm sure with everything that they know, they will try and do their best because they like Maidstone, they like Moat Park. But I know this has nothing to do with it. I just thought I'd say that because that's what I've been told in the past. Now, because certain other people brought it up, we've got to do all this sound business, whereas they don't suffer like the rest of us residents. And that's what I thought. I didn't mention it earlier because it just would have wound them up. But that's what I've been told in the past. So I'm quite happy to go with this. It's just a case of sorting the days out and then we can go home.
I do agree it's getting late. Councillor Ells, before we...
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just very briefly. Basically, I agree with Mrs Wilson. My concern, which I think we might have covered, was the 4 days, because the Rambling Man is 2 and the big day out is 2, and then it was the days with the sound checking that I was a bit... whether that came into it. That's what I was a bit concerned if you were limited to 4 days. I think if we could do the 2 events with some sort of proviso that says if we have Radio 1 turn up at our door and say we desperately want to put an event in your park, then we have some sort of special provision for allowing that. But yeah, I'd happily second that.
The recommendation is that we go with the papers as they are, with the amendment that the category A is reduced to 2 events a year, and that if a significant other opportunity arises, that with the agreement of the chairman, it is either brought to committee. And the reason I'm saying this is because because of what I know about what happens. Sometimes they say, you need to tell us whether you'll do it now, but you're not allowed to speak to anybody about it for 6 months. So if a significant other opportunity arises, it can be agreed with the chairman, with the proviso that it comes to committee as quickly as possible. You have to have a way round. Yes, sorry, chairman and vice. Sorry, always chairman and vice chairman.
Yeah, you second that? Okay. Thank you, members, for your patience. Can we, on that, with the recommendations, can we vote unanimous? Yeah, no objections, no abstentions. Thank you very much. Members, thank you very much. It's been a hard debate and we knew it was going to be that. I thank you for your time, and I will, at this moment, as the Christmas decorations are up, take this opportunity, because we don't meet again until January the 3rd, to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.